Hi, friends. So we thought that we would pass an article by Caitlin Johnson because and also we will do a just a bit of a passing of an interview with Max Blumenthal on Primo Radical as a follow-up to that. And let me just check out audio levels first before I do that. I don't exactly hear anything coming through the TV, Didi. Just hold on a sec. Let me just see. Wait a minute. Actually, I should probably hold on a sec. Should be something coming through. Oh, here's hi everyone. Oh, can you hear anything before we? If you can't hear anything, we might have to actually restart again. So let us know if you can hear something. And I don't know if I can't really hear anything. Wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Oh, there we go. I think we can hear something. Yeah, that's all right, Didi. Do you want to talk and just see if we've got the audio levels right? Hi, everyone.
Well, there we go.
How about you, Didi? Say something, Didi.
I did say something just a minute ago.
Okay, all right. I was wondering whether we should just start anyways now that we've done the start again, Didi, and what do you think?
Well, we can start now. I mean,
okay, all right.
Here.
So anyway, we were going to do this passing. Hi, Mom. We were going to do this passing of a article by Caitlin Johnson about the militarization of police in relation to COVID, and also a pass of an interview with Max Blumenthal on Primo Radical in relation to COVID and vaccines and all of that. So we wanted to do this because there's seems to be this what we see as a misapprehension about the militarization of police, as if it suddenly happened in relation to these lockdowns in Australia and in COVID and all of that, where it's actually been happening for some time, years in fact, since 9/11, and that has given the Australian government, as it has with other governments, permission to crack down and militarize police and weaponize them, etc. Militarize police, and also to increase surveillance and all the fun things that happen that governments tend to do when there's been a disaster event. They'll use that event. Any government uses disasters to increase surveillance, to crack down on civil liberties, take away civil liberties, and usually they cannot be reversed once they're taken away. And that of course happens everywhere. But in this particular instance, where we're going to look at Caitlin Johnson's article, this is what Max Blumenthal has also been doing in his commentary on Twitter about Australia, and also in his interviews. He cites Australia as this suddenly has become this sort of fascist, sort of authoritarian state. This has been, unfortunately, Max doesn't seem to know much about what's been happening in Australia, and he's got, unfortunately, an agenda that is anti-vax, and so he's sort of grasping at anything he can find to kind of support this. He wants herd immunity, basically. So we wanted to kind of just point out some facts about that this militarization of police has been going on for at least 10 years or more, and has happened since 9/11, and that they've been the weapons industry has been funneling weapons into through the Australian Defence Forces into the counter-terrorism units within the police in the States. And so that's sort of part of it. The weapons industry finds ways to sell their products, and that's one way with counterterrorism. So it all works out very well for the weapons industry. Anyway,
is Trish's volume all right? Because she's started talking louder and
Oh, I'm sorry.
going into the red.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That
I
kind of
might,
stuff.
yeah.
But just let me know if the volume's okay.
It doesn't seem like it's clipping, Dee Dee, so that's good.
Okay, that's all right
yeah,
then.
as long as it's not
Yeah.
clipping, then
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's sort of, I guess I,
Okay.
I've
Now-
I guess I'm just trying to explain why we're doing this.
Now, do you want me to read this article?
Yes,
or
let's
do you
read the
want-
article. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and stop me anytime you want.
Okay, and then we'll talk about this article, and we'll probably bring in some information from some other sources to sort of explain why we think that militarization has been happening since 9/11.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the article is Australians need to decide if this is the kind of country we want to live in from now on, which is a very dramatic kind of statement.
Actually, I can read it if you like, Dee Dee. Shall I read it? Because I've got the thing in front of
sure.
me. Okay.
Okay, you
so,
can see it.
So this is the article dated, when was this? I don't know. It was just recently, like probably
10
even
hours
today.
ago.
Yeah. So Australians need to decide if this is the kind of country we want to live in from now on. So she's got some fairly heavy-duty militarised police images there from Victoria. So a lot has changed for Victorians since the lockdown started. Our lifestyles, our waist sizes, the kinds of things we see as normal. And a lot has changed in Victoria itself since we've been in lockdown as well. For example, have you seen our police lately? If memory serves, they used to look something like this. And that's a picture of what they used to look like, and they still look like that. It's just anyway. But now we're seeing police that look like this. Okay, so she's got these various. I actually tried to look online to find, putting in militarized police, COVID, riots, Victoria, and it was actually difficult finding. Did you find that, Dee Dee? Images of this sort of thing?
Yeah.
But they do exist, okay? So anyway, and this.
Yes.
So we're going to...
Dee Dee's, can I just say?
Yeah, sure.
A lot of the pictures of the militarization of police, don't look like that.
No.
We have some other pictures of what they more frequently look like, and we'll put some of those up later on.
Yeah, hang on, let me just check. Just wait a minute, I just want to check and make sure. So anyway, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, of course, it doesn't really matter exactly what they look like. It's what they do that's the problem too. But anyhow, so Dee Dee, if you want to play that one of the police there in this, this one, yeah.
Okay.
And you may want to turn up the volume because I don't know how.
Okay, I'm not sure how much volume it has because I'm doing it through the website. I'm not sure whether it's getting much volume.
Anyway, you can stop it for a second. Just stop it. So as you can see, that's actually the Australian Defence Forces. That's not actually the Victorian Police that is coming out of that vehicle. And that is I don't know what that man was saying to that unmarked police car, and that to me seemed like a sort of overreaction to whatever he was saying, but I don't know what was going on also behind that screen, behind what the person who was taking this video. But as you can see, the Australian Defence Forces come out of the vehicle, but they're not holding any weapons. And by the way, I'm not defending this, I'm just explaining the video. They're not holding weapons. And then you see the Victorian police coming up to the Australian Defence Forces and sort of and basically I don't know, they're probably going to take over. Now we're not using the government has talked about using the Australian Defence Forces because I don't think they felt they had enough police to be able to
address the
borders and stuff like that, because they wanted to have the lockdown and try and contain COVID. And I don't know, as I mentioned, the Australian Defence Forces train the Victorian police and other states police. They do have sort of training by the Australian Defence Forces. But anyway, so that's a situation that's happening there. Now let's move down to the to this next one here. Now, this
Okay.
is very full on. I don't know what's this next video. I don't know what have you got the right one, Didi?
Yeah, I've got
Okay.
the next one. I think.
This is a image.
I'll play it.
Yeah. Now, this is in Victoria, Melbourne. You may want to increase the size of that.
I'm not sure if I can.
Oh, okay. There's a little
easily.
thing in the corner there, you see? See that? Yeah.
Okay. I'll play that again.
Yeah. Now this is really full on, and they literally have. See that militarized police hitting that guy in the back with his rifle.
I'm also not sure if this is that demonstration.
Right. See, yeah, that's the thing. It's
because these people are isolated, and in the demonstrations, most of them are together.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure where this image came from, but still, it's an image from. Yeah. It looks like an image from Melbourne.
It's certainly, fairly full-on, heavy-duty police.
Yeah, it's full-on, and I don't know what was going on there, and that's not great at all. So this is sort of like that's what you would call. I mean, that was what you would. It looks to me like a major overreaction, and I don't know why they're dressed like that for something like that. But anyway, let's go down to anyhow. We're going past. We've gone past. That's all right. I just want to make sure we're reading everything too.
Okay.
So we'll go back to this. So they're also riding around in armored vehicles called Bearcats like this. So we've shown that video, and they're acting differently too. They're firing on protesters with rubber bullets and often other projectile weapons with alarming frequency in order to end demonstrations against government shutdowns, lockdowns, and vaccine mandates. Frequently for no other reason than because the demonstrators are disobeying them. Okay, well...
now that... It sounds like, to me, like she's saying that as soon as they're doing, vaccine mandates or a lockdown, you bring in the police and start, taking down people in the street.
Yeah.
And it's... Can I go to some of the other reports?
Sure.
Okay. Now, there's been a few reports. I'll go to one of the other ones. Let's see if I can move this up. I'll move Caitlin down and that one up. Okay. Okay. Here's the Victorian police should have deployed the riot squad. This one says, now why has this got all this crap on it? I don't know. It's really frustrating.
Don't worry. Just show the article.
It won't let me.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you can just explain what it said.
But it basically says that on Saturday, the Victorian police, they had a big demonstration
in Melbourne.
And in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And the police came out and they weren't wearing any kind of riot gear.
Yeah.
They were just wearing their, short sleeve shirts and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And as a result, something like 10 police were hospitalized. People had broken arms, dislocated arms, torn muscles.
This is the police, yeah.
They were attacked with beer bottles, with rocks, with sticks by the demonstrators. In other words, and they said that it was the group of people who were protesting were really there to attack the police, it seemed, rather than to protest.
Well, the police... the police said that they were what? What was it?
Okay.
Nazi protesters?
The police said that a lot of the protesters were right-wing, and that the right-wing people were neo-Nazis from some of the neo-Nazi groups.
In Australia,
and in Australia.
Yeah.
They came out supposedly as construction workers. Now, something like 13% of the COVID cases in Victoria come from construction sites.
Yeah.
So it's a big source of community transmission in Victoria. So they were trying to do something about it. There was a demonstration at the Union. Let's see if I can find that. There was a demonstration at the Union, the CSMFU, which was the construction union, and the protesters were attacking people from the union itself.
Yeah.
And the union people actually came out with a statement that said that these people were not mainly construction workers, they were right-wing neo-Nazi groups and so on. This is the CFMEU, the unions thing. That was the construction union. The CFMEU condemns in the strongest possible terms the attack on the CFMEU Victorian branch office and the mindless acts of violence perpetrated by the members of the mob. The crowd was heavily infiltrated by neo-Nazis and other right-wing extremist groups that do exist. We have groups, particularly in Melbourne. There's groups like the Antipodean Resistance, who are well-known kind of neo-Nazis that are like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or something like that. And other right-wing extremist groups, and it's clear that a minority of those who participated were actually union members. So they're saying they weren't really construction workers, that they were right-wing neo-Nazi types. We thank the officials, delegates, and rank-and-file members of the union who came to protect their office and their officers, and note that a number of people received injuries and from acts of violence, including the throwing of bottles. People threw full bottles of things, stones, and all kinds of things. There was quite a bit of violence on that Saturday. They attacked cars in the street. This is just random people driving along, and smashed windows and that kind of thing. And so there was a call for, because the police hadn't brought any kind of riot squad there was a call for them to actually bring that out. Let's see if any of these other ones work. This one, Melbourne Descends into Chaos, this was from Tuesday. This is where you get some of the actual This is where you get some of the actual, people dressed up in kind of more neo-Nazi sort of thing. And for some reason, when I use a website from The Guardian, it doesn't work.
Don't worry.
The way it's supposed to. So I can't actually move it along. But you can see that these are much more militarized police here. And this continued on Wednesday with the rioters continuing to come out and say they're going to come out every day and continuing to attack police and that kind of stuff. And the police progressively, I think, started wearing protective stings and taking harsher measures.
Now, for those, excuse me, Didi, for those who just joined, we're not trying to explain away police violence, but we're also trying to explain that we're talking about this situation that happened in Melbourne recently with the riots, but we're also pointing out that militarisation of police has been happening for a long time, since 9/11, thanks to George W. Bush and the Project for the New American Century and all of that, and how governments use disasters. The militarization of police has been happening for at least 15 years or more. And it's not suddenly happening at COVID, which unfortunately there seems to be this narrative going around, through this article by Caitlin Johnson, as well as Max Blumenthal putting this out, that suddenly Australia has become this authoritarian, with states going into this authoritarian mode, and suddenly there's militarized police, and suddenly there's this, you know what I mean? It's all like as if it's all conflating something that's been going on for a long time, the militarization of police, and counterterrorism, using the whole war on terror thing to increase surveillance, to increase sort of crackdowns and taking away civil liberties and all of that. It's conflating that with this vaccine. This sort of
with lockdowns and vaccines.
Lockdowns and vaccines and all of that. And what Australia has been trying to do is, it's not like the the United States, which has an endemic situation with COVID. Australia has been trying to actually lock it down so that it won't become endemic. And so, and I'm not excusing the militarized police, some of the complete overreactions and using rubber bullets on protesters and stuff. I'm not excusing that, but what I'm trying to explain is that in this case with Australia, it's not like the US. We're trying to lock down so that it won't become endemic, and so that there will be enough people vaccinated. And vaccines, I know that some people that are anti-vaxxers conveniently ignore the fact that vaccines keep people out of ICU. They do keep people out of ICU, and pretty much 98% of people that are in ICU are not vaccinated. That's something that anti-vaxxers never really talk about. But we're trying to in Australia, the government is trying to get a majority of people vaccinated, even though they really were slow to buy vaccines, and it's a real shit show in that regard. But they're trying to get people vaccinated so we don't have a crazy endemic situation and massive deaths like has happened in the United States, where they're having thousands of people dying a day. We're trying to avoid that situation here, and to some extent we were successful. But because we have an authoritarian wannabe Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who just doesn't care about the public, he didn't order enough vaccines, and so we have this situation now where we have the Delta variant, which is incredibly contagious, and he hasn't ordered enough vaccines, and Australians weren't able to get vaccines. So that's the sort of situation, but they're trying to do lockdowns to prevent it becoming completely endemic. And that's something that is not mentioned when people who are trying to push a narrative, the sort of an anti-vaxxer narrative. I'm not saying Caitlin Johnson is trying to push that, although I think she's got some problems there at the end of this article. But I'm just trying to explain what Australia is trying to do that is the United States is too far gone to do in a way.
Yeah. Okay. I've put up a chart which I think is interesting, and it shows something where you can see that from the first, basically about the 21st of October through to late July, basically Australia had virtually no deaths at all of COVID.
What's that, Diddy?
From the about the 21st of October last year to late July this year, Australia had virtually no deaths.
Yeah.
And this is because Australia has had virtually no COVID.
Yeah.
There's been little breakouts here and there, and the response has been to create lockdowns. And to do contact tracing, you basically shut the area down, you figure out who had it, where they were, who were contacts to that. You ask them to isolate, and after a little bit, you can basically eliminate all of the COVID. In isolation, some people will get it and can get treated. Some people don't get it, and you know that they haven't got it. But this allows people to do that. And we went up when Trisha's mom died, we went up to Queensland.
Yeah.
And here's an example of what a lockdown was like. We were up there, and there was a case. Somebody from overseas had come in, and it had escaped from hotel lockdown.
Yeah.
Now, hotel lockdown is where, when you have people coming from overseas, they have to go into lockdown for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they put them in a hotel, which is kind of stupid. And this is partly the government has never come, the federal government, up to speed with actually creating a proper quarantine center where people could be properly isolated. And especially with Delta, being in a hotel isn't the best way to prevent the spread of COVID. And nearly all of the cases of breakouts of COVID in Australia have been escapes from hotel quarantine, where somehow or other, that's been passed on to someone working in the hotel or somebody else who's in quarantine in the hotel who then goes out and so on. But while we were there, there was a brief lockdown in Brisbane, the capital of Queensland, and they were closed for, what was it, 4 or 5 days, or was there only 3 days?
What was that? Which was closed?
The lockdown in Brisbane when we were there.
I don't know. I didn't pay much attention.
And for the rest of Queensland, they said people have to wear masks when they go in to restaurants and so on. Yeah. It doesn't stop people from going to restaurants. No. They just said wear masks up to the point where you're actually sitting at the table
and everybody
eating.
Was quite happy to do that.
And people were generally happy to do that because basically it allows, a lot of the time people could go around and go shopping and could work and could go to restaurants.
The culture
and that kind
here
of thing.
Is generally in Australia is the majority of people are quite happy to do stuff for community. Yeah. It's not the same as the United States, which I don't think Max Blumenthal understands, is that in the United States there's a lot of culture war and clashes, and people literally would do the opposite to anything that is requested of them, or like the government requests anything because they don't trust the government, and they have every reason to not trust the government. But still, if it's in your good interest to do something, whether you trust the government or not doesn't matter. It probably would have been a good idea if they'd done the whole lockdown thing properly in the beginning, but they didn't, and now it's endemic. But the difference between the United States and how they've handled this in Australia is the states took control of the lockdowns because they wanted it to be lockdown. They wanted to keep COVID down and under control.
Well, they wanted to keep COVID out of the community.
Out of the community. And people have been most people, the majority of people in Australia have been more than happy to get vaccines because they can see it works. It keeps people out of ICU, a fact that anti-vaxxers don't like to admit, but it does. They also see that the sooner they get this under control or keep it out, the sooner things can go back to normal. And it turns out that, even though
you can go back to normal.
That you can go back to normal.
I mean, it's like in Tasmania, we've eliminated it, and people go to music festivals and all this sort of stuff.
It's almost like we still do social distancing, but we don't run around in Tasmania. We don't wear masks here because
there is no COVID here.
There is no COVID here, and because we live on an island, it's very, very tightly controlled. And but basically, people have been able to pretty much live fairly normally. We still do. Yeah. You do the we do washing of hands and all this sort of thing. And when if we go on a plane, we put on masks and stuff like that, and we social distance. And we try to do the social distancing thing, but there is no COVID here and hasn't been since, March last year?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, or February last year. Yeah, so life has been fairly normal here, and that's what it could look like in the rest of Australia, except that the Delta variant came in, and then they had this hotel quarantines where the Delta variant was so contagious that the hotel quarantine thing didn't actually work in those hotels, did it, Dee Dee?
Well, it kind of worked, but there was more breakouts because it is more contagious. it is more easily spread through air conditioning or, through, somebody passing in the hallway when the door was open, or it is that kind of extreme thing. We've been able to catch, because so few people have had it. We've had videos of somebody getting COVID while they're standing in the street and somebody walks by like 2 meters away. That's about 6 feet away.
The Delta one.
And it was just somebody walking by. And that's all it took. And we actually had that on video.
That was a Delta variant, which is incredibly...
Delta variant. But it worked quite well before the Delta variant. And the thing to remember is that by doing these lockdowns, the reason New Zealand and Australia and stuff has been into these lockdowns is because it's allowed a lot of activities to go on as normal a lot of the time. In Australia, Tasmania is an island, as we've pointed out, but WA is almost a geographic island because there's a huge expanse of desert between Western Australia and the other parts, and even South Australia or Northern Territory are quite isolated from the other states. So when you hear people talk about, we need to stop these interstate border things, and some of these vaccine demonstrators are saying that, well, the states don't want that because in WA or South Australia, they basically don't have COVID. There's a few cases that they are dealing with. Mostly they're in quarantine. They've been able to trace who else might have been exposed. And so most people can relax and go about their business.
Anyway, we don't want to get lost in that because we've already explained
that. That's an important thing to understand. Why would Australians, put up with these horrible lockdowns? The reason they put up with them is because they have the benefits of that. And the reason they have the benefits is because we didn't let it get endemic in the first place.
And we actually, for a while before the Delta variant came along, we were actually doing really, really quite well, and everybody was having a reason, there was 0 cases in a number of states, wasn't there? And we've always been 0 since last year in March here in Tasmania, and that's because we're an island and we did the closing of the borders and stuff like that.
New South Wales and Victoria have had periodic outbreaks, mainly because they've had international flights coming in. And there'd be an escape from hotel quarantine of the virus.
And if this ends up endemic, it'll be because of
these
states,
demonstrators and so on.
But also the premiers succumbing to pressure for the economies. That's where neoliberalism and capitalism has ended up creating a lot of shit shows because it's all about the economy ultimately. It's not about people. It's not been about the economy so much here, really, has it, Didi? It's been part of it. But they actually see that if you lock it down quickly, then you can still have some functioning within the businesses. You don't have so much
international tourism, but I mean...
but you can have people going out and buying things. They have to wear masks and stuff and keep distance and everything.
Well... Or we've had music festivals here. New Zealand has had music festivals.
In Tasmania. You're talking about Tasmania. Be clear about...
And Tasmania.
In Tasmania. In Tasmania, we now have music festivals and stuff like that because we've had such a good lockdown.
Because there's been no COVID here.
And there's been no COVID here, And we live on an island and they have really strict entry. People are in quarantine and all that kind of stuff. But if they start getting slack with things like this in the other states, they're going to end up with a dreadful situation, which probably won't be able to be reversed, and it'll be endemic.
And it seems like that's almost the intention of these demonstrators.
To make it endemic.
They want to stop, the border restrictions and so on. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want? I mean, the only result of that would be to spread COVID into WA or Queensland or these other states.
And there's also, one can sort of talk there could be also some astroturfing of these protests going on, where they're not really organic. Who knows? You have to sort of wonder about some of the you just don't know. Like, it's interesting how these people are able to organize. I'm talking about the neo-Nazis and stuff. You know what I mean? Diddy.
Yeah.
They use any opportunity to actually cause some sort of riot, basically.
Yeah.
Anyway, but anyhow, we just think for people who have just joined in, I'll just quickly explain what we were talking about earlier before we went off onto vaccines and lockdowns and stuff. We were talking about how the militarization of police in Australia has happened. It hasn't been a sudden thing that's happened with these COVID lockdowns and the riots and all of this sort of thing. It's been happening since 9/11. Another gift that the US has given Australia, where the government can use any sort of disaster to increase surveillance, to increase crackdowns on civil liberties, take away civil liberties, and all of that kind of thing. All governments do it, and this government is no exception, the Australian government. And we've had a lot of right-wing conservative prime ministers since 9/11, which doesn't help. And this Scott Morrison is no exception. And he'll just follow along with the US into a war on China. He's like that. So it's this militarization of police. We're talking about Caitlin Johnson's article, which kind of implies that almost that suddenly the militarization of police has happened.
Tom Hall.
Pardon?
Tom Hall is here.
Has happened since this COVID thing, but it's been happening since 9/11 basically, and sort of has been becoming more and more pronounced. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to explain. Yeah. And because Max Blumenthal has been highlighting this over and over and over again, using Australia as sort of to back up his anti-vaxxer and all that sort of theories that he's trying to make out as if Australia has suddenly become this authoritarian nightmare. Well, that's actually not the case. Yeah. And I wish that he understood what was going on here and stuff. The other problem I just wanted to talk about quickly, Didi, was the fact that we have no real fourth estate here in Australia. So we have to we really, there's no independent media that you can really draw on to actually find out real information about things too. So that's another problem we have here in Australia. Yeah. And that's something we can talk about in a little bit. But anyway, you go on, Didi.
Holly said, and there's income support, yes.
Well, that's right.
Yes. Yes, exactly. There has been income support. I mean, Australia has basically free health care. That's one thing to start out with. I mean, that's
which is being whittled away.
Not for COVID. It's always been there, and then or it has been since Whitlam, and it also has unemployment, which means in Australia, unemployment is for anyone who is unemployed for as long as they are unemployed.
Yeah, unemployment, even though
it doesn't relate to how much you earned or anything like it does in the US.
No, but it's really, really pathetic, though, the amount.
It is pathetic. They have age pensions and other things which are better. I mean, the government have been discussing about increasing or keeping pace. Basically, the unemployment rate hasn't increased for 25 years. And now it's not enough to live on.
But there is some form of social support, and they increased the unemployment benefits.
They doubled it, basically.
They doubled it during COVID. And they gave... unfortunately, as what they did in the United States, they gave big corporations job seeker payments, they gave them job keeper payments. So they gave them heaps of money, like they did in the United States.
And those were supposed to get passed on to the employees,
and they didn't.
But in some cases they did, but in many cases they didn't.
Yeah. So that's another example.
People like Harvey Norman are notorious for having pocketed a lot of that money.
Yeah, sure, and it's
a scandal here.
Multi-billion-dollar corporation, Harvey Norman.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
can I just go back?
Yes, please continue.
You can see the picture that's up there now. That is a picture from an article in 2018, a few years before, about the militarization of the police. There's a situation a few years before that with the border force, and I'm not sure why that. I think I have to
Do you want
and the border force fiasco was, we have a particularly evil guy, kind of thuggish minister in the Conservative government, Peter Dutton, who was put in charge of the Australian Federal Police and immigration, and he created this thing called the Border Force. And there was a thing called Operation Fortitude. This was 7 years ago in Victoria, where he had these people, these kind of quasi-police fascist people, stopping people who looked like they might be migrants, which means anybody of color, anybody who, and harassing them. Now, Melbourne is known as a very multicultural city. So there's a lot of people who are migrants and look like that. And the result, he had them just randomly stopping people and asking them to prove their Australian citizenship. And so there was massive protests in Melbourne. It became a scandal. It was shut down almost immediately. The police said they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So there's two sides to some of this stuff. It's not all, becoming more and more fascist. There is that side of it. And then there's the other side where police are trying to be better with community and that kind of stuff. But that other one picture that I had, this one here, you can see, I'm hoping that shows up. You can see the militarized police out the front, and the police who just have vests on are not militarized in the back. And it's like there are these tactical units in the police, but not all police are like that.
No, and the weapons industry funnel. They do these deals with the counterterrorism units within the police. And they, like one I think it was the New South Wales police had I think it was the counterterrorism. They had AR-15s and M4, automatic weapons that they had spent $24 million on that.
That article in the Victorian Police that I put up explains that too. That was from 2018.
And this one was
this has been going on since 2001.
And this is 2017. There were 600 AR-15s and M4s or something that the New South Wales Police purchased. The counterterrorism, I think it was. I don't know if it's counterterrorism or the police themselves had it. But anyway, the counterterrorism unit.
Police counterterrorism units.
Right. So that's a specialized unit within the police. I mean, you don't see police walking around Melbourne looking like what Caitlin Johnson is showing in her
fascists.
thing. No, you don't have that happening, thank goodness. And you don't have that happening here at all. You don't have that happening in Queensland, or that's, it's sort of not something you see.
That's not to say the police don't have bigotry or can be racist or mistreat people of indigenous descent or Islamic people
or abuse power. Like I heard things that during the COVID things, the police were harassing Muslims. Now I don't know, they were sort of like going in, I don't know, knocking at the door and sort of, I don't know, questioning people. Now I don't know much about that, and that is the problem with Australia, is we do not have a fourth estate that is reliable, and because most of it is owned by Rupert Murdoch, 75% of everything that is we hear, read and watch on TV is owned by Rupert Murdoch in Australia, right, Didi? When it comes to police, when it comes to Didi? When it comes to anything about the news, most of it is through the lens of the Rupert Murdoch media.
Almost everything.
And then the rest of it is just general corporate media. So we have no fourth estate to speak of, and therefore That's why I barely mention anything about Australia. And one of the reasons, of course, is I focus on the US, because of US empire and how it affects all the countries in the world. It's the greatest purveyor of violence. That's my focus because it affects every country on the planet. But also the case is I really don't know what's going on in this country because we don't have a fourth estate to speak of.
Yeah. The Rupert Murdoch's also all of his media is incredibly right wing. It puts out an agenda which is extremely kind of into supporting imperialism. It's into denial of climate change. It's transphobic. It's homophobic.
Yeah.
It's against women's rights. Sky News
it's worse.
Is worse than Fox News
it's
ever
literally
was.
Worse than Fox News now.
And this is the majority of our newspapers and radio stations and TV stations.
It is full-on culture war propaganda constantly.
Yeah.
They are constantly bombing you with, and they've been doing this now for decades, bombing you with how the poor are just lazy and good for nothing. The homeless, who gives a shit? They're it's just like disparaging. It's like the worst aspects of what goes on in the US. It's amplified here. Sky News is now worse than Fox News, and I never thought
worse.
Yes, way worse. And I never thought. I couldn't imagine at one point anything being worse than Fox News, but it is. And they do nothing but propagandize the public all the time, don't they, Didi? It's constant.
Yeah.
It's constant.
And we have basically two other news networks, and they're virtually as bad. And then we have the public broadcaster, the ABC, which, like the BBC, ABC is the Australian Broadcast Corporation.
And that used to have...
But the Australian Broadcast Corporation has been whittled away. They've been defunded by governments progressively.
Yeah.
They have had... conservative governments put in chairmen of the ABC. They keep getting questioned in Parliament for any kind of hint of being, less than conservative.
Yeah.
And so they've turned into basically another fairly conservative. They're not as conservative as the rest of the media.
No.
But that's not saying much.
No, I mean, look at the 7:30 report just recently. The 7:30 report is a kind of prime time ABC Australian Broadcasting
major investigative journalist.
It's supposed to be, Australian
be.
Broadcasting Corporation. It's like something that people would say, "Oh, I trust." I would trust this program, right? And the other night, about 2 weeks ago, I saw something on China. And it was just full on for like 10 minutes, just full on U.S. national security state, CIA propaganda. Just the whole thing from start to finish. Now, and then there are the SBS has kind of become like that.
That's the special broadcast service, which was for, basically it was intended for multicultural the multicultural community. It actually puts out shows in other languages.
Anyway, that's become co-opted by something, and now they put out like anti-China talking points too. So, I'm going to put something out there about the SBS, which is speculation. Now, I'm not a journalist, so I can speculate away. I'm going to put out something about Stan Grant. I think I'm starting to think that Stan Grant, or one could wonder, Stan Grant, who's an Indigenous news presenter, who I remember him coming into SBS. I don't know, when was that, Didi? Was that in the 90s?
It was
early 1990s, something like that. Anyway, he was introduced into SBS as one of the newsreaders, along with Mary Kostakidis. Mary
Kostakidis helped create SBS.
Yeah, Mary Kostakidis helped create SBS, and Mary Kostakidis right now has left journalism, and she's now doing other stuff, but she's also a big supporter of Julian Assange. But anyway, at the time when Stan Grant who came to SBS, and he was a new face in SBS. He actually treated Mary Kostakidis incredibly bad and basically ignored her, to the point where eventually I think they pushed her out of SBS, and she tried to sue them, and I think she may have even got a settlement. So he managed to, after his appearance there, I'm not saying that he was the one that pushed her out, but what happened was a cascade of events, and she ended up leaving. And so he ended up there as the new as the face of SBS, and the SBS became quite commercialized, didn't it, Didi?
Yeah.
And then after that, since then, it's been a downhill slide, and now Stan Grant, who is also now, he's become a member of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is a weapons-funded industry think tank, in quotes. And it's a right wing. It's been rapidly pushing a war on China, and Stan Grant has been part of that Australian Strategic Policy Institute.
This is
he's actually now got a program called China Tonight, which is basically propaganda, about anti-China propaganda, picking apart all the things that are wrong with China. And this is help preparing and manufacturing consent for a war on China. And I really have to wonder about Stan Grant, whether he's literally part of, like, there was an ex-CIA agent talked about how there are so many very, very public journalist figures throughout the world that are on the CIA payroll, and they're fed CIA talking points, and they put them out, to change the narrative about different countries that are the target of the US, and just different narratives for domestic purposes to help the government. And that's something that the CIA has admitted doing. An ex-CIA agent has admitted doing that. They do that, and I feel like I'm not saying he is, but I feel like Stan Grant is probably one of these figures because of his history, and he's become a really, really prominent person in the Australian media that isn't Murdoch, right, Didi?
Yeah. I have up a thing from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, the strategist, and as you can see, it's the advertisers on the side are all military-industrial complex.
Yeah, they're totally funded by every big weapons manufacturer there is.
This article is The Militarization of Australian Police, Another View. It's not really being militarized, and so on. But this is the kind of shit that the ASPI put out.
Yeah. Anyway, so the reason I brought up Stan Grant is because that's an example of what's happening here in Australia, that we're so infiltrated here. We're either getting Murdoch press, propaganda and culture wars and constant demonization of the poor and all of this, or we're getting people like Stan Grant who the public probably trust because he's an Indigenous news person that's been around for a long time. But he's actually, I really feel like he's just part of this, like I say, I feel like he is possibly a part of or even on the CIA payroll. Who knows? But anyway, that's what we're just basically talking about. What a mess the Fourth Estate is here, and that you wouldn't know what was going on because we don't have any. Like at least in the United States, there's a number of independent journalists looking into stuff and investigating things and everything. But here, it's like it's pretty much zip, isn't it, Didi?
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's continue.
Okay. Well, I don't know if we want to read through the entire article.
No.
Basically, she speaks as if, there's this awful thing. It's all becoming very militarized and all that sort of stuff. And there are aspects of the police that are definitely problematic.
Yeah.
There are certainly fascist tendencies in Australia, but they don't have anything to do with COVID, and they've been around for a long time, particularly with conservative governments, but with both sides of government.
Yes.
We've seen the erosion of rights, the increase in surveillance and all that kind of stuff, supported by both the Conservative and the Labour Party.
Yeah.
They both go along with that just fine.
Yeah.
We've had situations where the federal police have gone into journalists, the ABC's offices, because they were doing whistleblowing. About
David McBride is going to be up on trial. He's the whistleblower for the Afghan files. He's like
he revealed
the persons of interest that were doing these war crimes, and war is a crime, but there were soldiers that have obviously done war crimes. They're still running around free. David McBride is going to be up on trial, so that gives you this is just like in some ways the United States, and how Australia, of course, has treated Julian Assange.
It certainly has its tendencies that way.
Yes, it has its tendencies that way. Of course, the way they're treating Julian Assange, this Australian government has completely abandoned him, and that's
and the
appalling.
Labor Party isn't any better.
No, the Labor Party is horrific. And the Greens Party is not so great either. The Greens Party, in fact, like I don't know if I mentioned this recently, is not pushing back on the war on China thing really at all. They're having a bit of a fuss about the nuclear weapons thing. Sorry, the nuclear submarines, but they're not really pushing back on this war on China much at all.
No.
So I mean, we don't really. This is the state of politicians here. It's really, really pathetic.
Yeah. Basically, ever since, the Hawke government, Labour government, was the model for Tony Blair's government. Yeah. He took his lead from them, and they were the people, the Labour government basically brought in a neoliberal point of view. The
Australian Labour government.
And started eroding all of the work of Whitlam, who was our Labour Prime Minister, who basically introduced free medical, free education, university education, and a whole range of things that were really important.
Was against the Vietnam War, was against war in general.
He was against the U.S. bases
and that's
here,
verboten.
And that's why the U.S. Basically the CIA destabilized him, and they created a regime change. Where he was literally thrown out of office in the middle of his term.
Yeah, that's right.
The Labour Party.
And it's been a neoliberal mess ever since, and I mention that regularly.
But we wanted to point out that although the militarization is going on, and there are these fascist tendencies, it's a mixed bag. I mean, Australians are not particularly fond of government. They never have been.
Yeah.
But they're pretty reasonable people too.
Yeah.
They're not. I think we basically don't object to government on principle.
Yeah.
We don't go along with everything that government says.
No.
We're very wary of all that.
Yeah.
But if something is sensible,
and we're generalizing, of course, but that's sort of we're generalizing, of course, but that's the general feeling that a lot of Australians have about government is you have a healthy suspicion, healthy kind of a wariness about them, but you also don't mind them. But of course, if the government will certainly hear about it if people aren't happy about it.
But if there's something like this border force fiasco, people come out in the street and they had to stop.
The problem, though, is that when it comes to anti-war stuff, the last big anti-war demonstration was in 2003, and they didn't listen. They just ignored it, didn't they, Didi?
Yeah.
And that is the problem now with governments. They just don't care what you're protesting against, really. Like when it comes to big issues that involve the United States and imperialism, they don't care what you say or do. You can ring them up till you're blue in the face. You can protest. You can do whatever, and they don't care. They just go along with it, don't they, Didi?
After that big anti-war demonstration, basically everything fell in a heap.
Yes, it did. And there hasn't been any sort of anti-war movement to speak of since then, has there, Didi?
No.
It was an organic thing too. Everybody, like I went to the march in Sydney, and it was huge, and it was just like a huge march that was just organic. People just turned out.
200,000 people.
Yeah, it was
something
huge.
Like that.
It was huge, and it was peaceful, and you would think that the government would have listened to that. No. Yeah. Anyway, so do we want to get to the end of this? The end of this?
I'll go to the end of this article.
Let me read the end of it here. This is the end of Caitlin Johnson's article about the militarization. Hang on. The name of the article is Australians need to decide if this is the kind of country we want to live in from now on.
Can I read this bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
But can I just say about that title from now on? That it's been going on a lot longer than from now, it's been going on since 9/11. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah, I will also make the point that, as you say, the militarization has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And that is a real issue.
Yes.
To look at.
Yes.
It's the conflation of that issue and the COVID thing, which is really problematic.
Yeah.
I mean, if Caitlin Johnson had wanted to use a bit of nuance and actually discuss that issue, I mean, but what she did was basically a lot of very emotive argument.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, do we, what should police do?
Yeah.
If there are demonstrators who are violent, who are attacking the police and putting them in hospital and stuff, should the police wear body armor and so on and look fascist, or not? When is it appropriate for the police to do that kind of thing?
And there's no context here of that 9/11 and there wouldn't be all this counterterrorism stuff and the excuse to have counterterrorism units with full on the whole weaponized thing with the AR-15s and the whole shebang. There wouldn't be any need for a lot of that. Of course, they'd probably have, every country probably used to have some sort of counterterrorism thing somewhere. But now it's like it's made it totally acceptable, all the 9/11 stuff from then on, using that disaster. So
basically,
some context
in Australia, there's only been, like, in the last 20 years, there's only been about 5 people shot in any kind of terrorist situation that they would call terrorist. That's not a whole lot of people. It's not like there's massive terrorism.
The thing that's been really awful is how much that 9/11 thing created such a problem for Muslims that have been living in this country forever and a day, and harassing Muslims and the Islamophobia and stuff. And now we've got the anti-Asian stuff because thanks to the narrative of the coming war on China. So that's much more of an issue really than how many people have been killed in whatever. But anyhow,
now there are real issues there, but this is not what Caitlin Johnson is looking at.
No,
she's not doing a balanced thing because I mean, it would have been interesting because these demonstrations were particularly violent. And the police didn't start out doing the full-on militarized stuff. And they did that in large point as a response to the violence that they were subject to, that ordinary people were being subject to.
I don't disagree. I disagree totally with firing rubber bullets at anyone, which apparently at the memorial shrine, the police were firing, the militarized police were firing rubber bullets at protesters to disperse them.
Or those batons.
I don't know. I think there was rubber bullets. That is absolutely
Both.
inappropriate, right? And rubber bullets are lethal. Often they can be lethal. Sorry, and they maim, and they hurt like hell. So I mean, they're not some non-lethal method. They're absolutely can be lethal. Anyway, so that is absolutely not acceptable to me. But anyway, but as you say, Didi, it didn't start off like that. The police started off as they usually do, dressed in the way she pointed out earlier in the piece. Then the Nazis got involved in the protests and took over and basically exploited the protests to do the usual thing that they do. The neo-Nazis.
I think they were involved in the beginning of that,
right?
In creating those protests.
And then it went from there. And I'm not excusing some of the methods they used. I think that's the overwhelming force in some cases, or rubber bullets or whatever. No, that's not acceptable to me. But anyway,
anyway, she sits there and she says things like, "Do we want to live in a country where protests protesters are fired upon by dangerous projectile weapons, if the police decide it's time for them to leave, where protests are violently quashed, if the government, the only so-called democracy in the world without any kind of statute or Bill of Rights, mind you, decides you don't have permission to protest, where armored stormtroopers patrol the streets, where people are apprehended simply for filming police. Now, of course, nobody wants any of these things.
Yeah.
And, we do have a sense of rights, and I don't think we're the only democracy in the world that doesn't have a formal Bill of Rights.
No.
And
I mean, look at the U.S. The U.S. has a constitution, and the government
they have a constitution, and the only right that they defend is the right to bear arms.
Yeah, and they shit all over they've got the NDAA with they're able to arrest citizens in the U.S. without counsel and detain them indefinitely, and even legally kill them, like they did with Anwar al-Awlaki and his 16-year-old son, droned them. They can do that under the NDAA. Now, so where is the pushback on that by all those, particularly the far right, talking about the Constitution, and they never ever talk about the NDAA. But I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Anyway, I just wanted to point out that sort of, that.
Well,
anyway,
she goes from things like where armed stormtroopers patrol the streets, where people are apprehended simply for filming police, where police show up at your doorstep, all horrific things. And then she does kind of a bait and switch and changes it to, I understand that lockdowns and vaccine passports are still fairly popular ideas here, but at what point do we say no? Hang on, what are we saying no to? I thought it was to stormtroopers in the street.
Yeah, really.
Now suddenly we're saying no to vaccine passports. And
that's where this conflation keeps happening with, and I have to wonder what is Caitlin Johnson's position on the vaccine and on, because that sort of leaves this kind of, that it conflates the militarization. That they're the same thing. Yeah.
That a lockdown is the same as stormtroopers in the street.
Yeah.
But the people in Australia, as we explained before, don't mind lockdowns, that much. Many people are okay with those because they've allowed us to be COVID-free a lot of the time.
And there's social support. There's payment support and stuff.
And there's payment support for people. There's income support. There is free medical health.
Yeah, free healthcare. There's Medicare.
There's a whole range of supports that are there in Australia. Yeah. And so it's been less damaging for ordinary people.
Yeah.
And it's allowed people to get on with a life in a fairly normal way.
Yeah. To some extent, yes, because
they've
had that support.
The
because they've had that government support, which is something that the United States doesn't have that, because they're a failed state, basically.
Yeah, but even when you're not, like when you're in a lockdown, there's that economic support, and when you're not in a lockdown situation, you're able to get on with your life pretty much.
Yeah. Now, if there hadn't been that support, there might have ended up being a much bigger, a really huge shit show.
It might have been a real shit show. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's essential that government supports a population in a time of disaster financially because, well, they're public servants, for one. They're not our rulers. Yeah. And two, that's what governments are supposed to be doing. Yeah. They're not supposed to be rulers and lords and ladies and shit like they behave in the United States. Yeah. So we have a certain amount of that. We haven't arrived at the rulers thing yet. We still, I think governments, most of the politicians still kind of are at the level of that they're still viewed as public servants, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
and there's an attitude in Australia that, I'm as good as you.
Yeah.
To put it briefly, bluntly, and the idea of, like they're doing that whole Australian values thing to try and suppress migrants.
What the hell is that anyway?
Where that seems to be about Anzac and supporting, but I mean, real Australian values are, things like a fair go.
Yeah, it used to be. I think it still is. But
well, that's
go,
an Australian value. It's not an imported suppression.
No,
and a mock value.
And it's pretty much been that a multicultural society. The way Indigenous people are treated is bad.
Yeah.
And the way the government treats Indigenous people, in some ways it's good, in other ways it's awful. There's a lot of lip service to Indigenous people, with all the, saying all this stuff about, the way they preface speeches and stuff, but really not doing that much for them. Anyway, but anyhow, so the end bit of this article is sort of conflating two things that are two separate issues. And one of them has been in existence for a lot longer than COVID. That's the militarization of police. And
that's a real issue.
That is a real issue. And that can be, and of course that's always of concern if it starts to become the norm, and that everything, and we're talking about the slippery slope that these militarized police can start being deployed to crack down on nonviolent protesters the way it's done in the United States. Basically the BLM protests, militarized police coming out immediately and trying to literally start a riot. The police, their militarized police, literally always trying to start the riots. The protests were non-violent and calm, and then the militarized police would turn up, and then they would start antagonizing things. That's what happens in the U.S.
Here in Australia, I mean, there is the issue of militarization, and that's a real issue. And that there is the issue of when do you actually bring in, some police force? In what circumstances do you do that? There's also the nuanced issue that in the U.S. particularly, what you see is, if you have a right-wing demonstration, quite frequently the police don't do bugger all. When you had those Trump Proud Boys running through Portland in the pickup trucks, bashing up people in the street, the police were nowhere. When you have a Black Lives Matter demonstration, the police are everywhere. When you have the actual invasion of the Capitol building, where were the police?
Anyway,
and that kind of uneven treatment. You saw that a bit in Sydney with the western suburbs, the treatment of people there, where you could see some of the bigotry come out in relation to the Muslim communities or the Asian communities which live in those areas. But that's a real issue, and that needs to be examined. But that's an issue on its own. With COVID stuff, I mean, it's a real issue whether you have mandates. Like, I'm not sure these mandates are a great idea. On the other hand, I think a mandate that says healthcare workers need to be vaccinated, I think that's important. Because that impacts people. I think people should absolutely have a choice about vaccines, but I don't think we should open up everything until everybody who wants to be vaccinated has the opportunity to be vaccinated.
And as I've said, Didi, it's much better.
In Australia, that's not been the case because of the lack of bloody vaccines.
Yes, that's right. And Scott Morrison,
which is down to the federal government.
That's right. The federal government did not order enough vaccines because Scott Morrison doesn't care about the people.
And we're still unvaccinated because
the states were the ones that actually got enough, pushed the government to hurry up and get, and that we're still looking for vaccines and stuff. That it's sad, but the what was I going to say about?
But the conflation of that is just wrong. I mean, when she goes into that, I understand the lockdown and vaccine passports are still fairly popular ideas here. Oh, yes, because we're so conservative. But at what point do we say no? At what point do we say enough is enough? Well, actually, like the popular view here is we try and stop the spread of COVID because it isn't endemic in many places until everyone who is vaccinated, wants to be vaccinated, is vaccinated.
Yeah.
Now, if they open it up at that point and people don't want to be vaccinated, well, that's on their heads.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's difficult for medical people because when there are a lot of unvaccinated people, the medical facilities, hospitals and stuff are overwhelmed. When that happens, it makes it difficult for people who have a heart attack or who
that's right. This is where
stroke.
This is where there was a worry in Victoria that the hospitals were going to be so full of COVID patients that they weren't going to be able to have other patients come in. Now, I'm not for this.
In the UK, I've heard them talk about the fact that people haven't been able to have elective surgery since the start of the pandemic.
But the difference between Australia and the United States is that here, there's a lot of people that are unvaccinated because they couldn't get a vaccine because the government dragged its feet, the federal government, and didn't accept...
And did bugger all.
And so, there are people now that are infected due to government incompetency.
Lack of government action.
Incompetency. And so, it's not like, people just saying, no, I'm not going to have one. Actually, a lot of people in Australia are more than happy to have it. I don't agree with vaccine mandates. I think that an incentive, like Albanese from the opposition was saying, pay everybody $300 each to encourage them to get a vaccine. That would probably be much more desirable than any sort of force thing. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with vaccine passports. I don't agree with anything. I was actually
vaccine
against...
passports are a stupid idea because people who are vaccinated can still get COVID. And the idea of a passport that you are now okay for everything. Well, you're not.
No, you're not.
You still have to take public health measures.
Exactly.
Because not everybody has been able to be vaccinated.
And every year, because it's endemic in some countries now because of government incompetency, and also pushbacks from people, from certain groups and stuff. Now every year now we're probably going to get a different variant that's going to require a different fucking vaccine. You know what I mean? Every year a different booster, right? Just like the flu.
You're going to find vaccines, the mutations that allow the vaccine, that the virus not to be affected by the vaccines, will become the dominant ones. They're not dominant at the moment. It's mainly how infectious the virus is.
But also, Didi, I just wanted to quickly say something about the neo-Nazis that infiltrated those protests and took them over, and it became violent and everything. I mean, it coincides that neoliberalism, as it progressed in Australia, as when the CIA helped get rid of Gough Whitlam, who was a democratic socialist prime minister, when that happened in 1975, ever since then it's been a neoliberal slide, and there's been more and more, the amount of, the cost of living has gone up tremendously. The cost of rents is insane. Like in Sydney is one of the highest rent payments you have to make in Sydney. And so, there's basically a, when you have that sort of, eventually when you have kind of a lot of poverty, which Australia is starting to get, and there are homeless people now, unhoused people, that's when you start to get, groups, you start to get reactionary type things. You start to get
Antipodean resistance.
You start to get that kind of thing, and that becomes more pronounced. So this is an example of capitalism creating a situation now where we have these groups that can be fairly violent in Australia, whereas it wasn't really so much of a problem back in the 80s, back in the late 70s, before neoliberalism, was it, Didi? The neo-Nazi thing is really just in the last probably 20 years.
Well, I don't know. I think there have been bigots.
Oh, bigots, yes. Well, I'm talking about real Nazis.
Real organized bigots.
Real organized,
Like there are very definitely organized, kind of fascist bigots in... particularly in Melbourne and increasingly in Sydney. The Antipodean resistance, which is outright neo-Nazi. There's this group of these people who own a series of health clubs where they train people in fighting, and they've had various, kind of outrages in the streets and here and there. They're a bit like Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys and stuff like that.
Right.
But
anyway, so what I'm saying is, though, those groups, those far right groups, tend to grow up in a situation of wealth inequality and stuff like that. And don't they, Didi?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When things are not right, that's when,
I think
when
it
people are
attracts
happy,
more people.
Yeah. When people are happy, Didi,
Yeah.
and there's social equality and equity and stuff, you're not going to usually get full on bigoted, carrying on and wanting to, destroy things.
And wanting to find someone to blame things on.
Yes, exactly. And of course the Murdoch media has been pumping that narrative about that as usual, that any minority groups are to blame for the situation, including migrants and all of that. Anyway, I think we can probably leave that now, but I was wondering, shall we quickly go through Max Blumenthal's video?
I'll just go to the end of this, where she sits there. Is it really worth holding that hard line? How much of our soul is Australian willing to trade in order to enforce strict COVID regulations? I mean, this conflation of, dealing with COVID and the military stuff is just,
it's unfortunate.
Just wrong.
Well, it's unfortunate because it feeds into that whole narrative, which helps actually the
really
narrative.
Helps just to spread COVID.
Yeah, and it does. It does help to spread it. Yeah, and it helps strengthen that narrative that the far righters are putting out, which is just the whole push down. Let's have it everywhere. Let's have herd immunity in quotes, which means let's have hundreds of thousands of people in countries die so that I'm not inconvenienced. I mean, in Australia, it's not like we're not supported by the government financially, right, during this. So it's not like we're in the United States where there's really hardly any support at all. It's a failed state, right? So, what exactly, that's sort of something that is present in Australia. And so, I don't know. I think the most important thing is that people don't die by the hundreds of thousands in Australia.
Yeah.
So it would be really great if people didn't conflate this whole militarization thing as if it's a sudden thing. It's been happening since 9/11, the build-up of militarized police and stuff like that. So, it's just a really unfortunate narrative that's just a little bit grifty. I'm sorry to say that, but it's a little bit grifty.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, can we go to Max Blumenthal and...
Yeah. Okay, let's see.
We're going to do a quick run through with Max Blumenthal's sort of a, he kind of sees those who are sort of going on about the global South and the vaccine. There's sort of the situation where they're begging for vaccines, and the global North is the patents, the corporations, the big pharma are refusing to release the patents, and so that countries like India and so forth can produce these vaccines themselves. So you've got the global South begging for vaccines and people in the global North thumbing their noses at vaccines and rejecting them and protesting against them violently and stuff like that in some cases. So that's really unfortunate. So Max is sort of basically saying, part of what he's saying in this video is that, he says, here's people, here's the left, talking about the global South and how awful that is, that they're whatever, but at the same time they're not saying anything about the vaccine apartheid situation in the United States, sort of thing, as if there's this false equivalency, really, in that it's a different, like the vaccine. There are people who don't want the vaccine in the United States, and there's people that do, and it's free. But there's been a politicization of vaccines, and as just like in this march, this riot in Australia, people exploiting a particular event, for political purposes. And so, it's like they're two different things. Like I am sort of a bit. I've shown my dismay at how there's people in the global south begging for vaccines. Like Luna Oy talks about that. About Luna in the Vietnamese Communist talks about that on her site. And then you've got people sort of thumbing their noses at vaccines in the United States, and yet
taking the world by storm.
What I can't remember exactly the whole, but he's basically sort of drawing this equivalency between that, as if you should be, as if they're the same thing. What are you looking for, Didi?
I'm trying to play this.
This is in Rockfin, Didi. Do you want me to send you the...
No, it's on...
Oh, okay. They don't usually give advertisements on Rockfin.
Okay, but it's not on Rockfin. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right. It's on Primo Radical.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Oh, sorry, I was getting confused, so... Anyway, this is an interview with Max Blumenthal on Primo Radical, and I'm sorry to keep pointing out Max Blumenthal here, but I mean, he's a trusted news source, a trusted journalist who's done great work, really great work. I've mentioned him many, many times on this channel, Faint Signals from Vega, and I've promoted the Grey Zone a lot. And I still think they do great work, but I feel like this foray into sort of anti-vaxxer stuff, and Max says he's not an anti-vaccine person, but he is. Everything that he says is anti-vaxxer, really, isn't it, Didi?
Yeah.
He claims that he's not, and yet then will proceed to find anything scienceless and whatever and cherry pick to back up a confirmed bias he has.
And what he refuses to look at is the fact that the majority of people in ICUs and hospitals are unvaccinated people.
And he wants herd immunity. That's something that he hasn't said that, but everything that he says, basically, he just wants everything opened up. He wants it all to go back to normal, in quotes, and that means that hundreds of thousands, well, there's already thousands dying a day, isn't there, in the United States?
Yes.
It's up to 650,000 or something now have died in the United States. Well, herd immunity hasn't worked very well for those people.
Yeah.
And if there wasn't any vaccines, it would be way worse. And he's basically using the fact that instead of explaining to the audience that COVID variants, that basically you're going to, that the vaccine isn't working so well with COVID variants. It's helping keep people out of ICU and dying, but it's not, people still can transmit COVID, right, Didi, after a vaccine?
Yeah.
And that they're obviously going to have to refine the booster shots and stuff to keep up with the variants. And the variants exist because any virus mutates naturally, but also there are a lot of naive hosts that can assist with that.
Yeah. Basically, the more people who have COVID, the more mutations there will be.
Yeah.
So if you have something like Africa, where there's a whole continent of mostly naive hosts who are all going to end up getting COVID as it spreads, well, you're going to have a lot of, or someplace, people have been concerned about Indonesia as it rips through Indonesia, which is an extremely populated country. Now, in the U.S. at the moment, there's over 2,000 people dying a day of COVID.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, in contrast, there's only been about 1,000 people who've died overall.
Yeah.
And yes, we have a smaller population, but it's not that much smaller.
No. And if we did what Max wanted, it would be everywhere and there'd be hundreds of thousands of people dying. But anyway, so if you hear a echo in the background, it's because I can't hear Max. Didi's playing it through her monitor, and I can't hear it through my headphones. So I'm going to have to play it through a monitor, or the TV basically. So if you hear an echo, that's if I can't hear him, I don't know what he's saying, and I can't really comment. So, okay. So let's do that, Didi.
So shall we play?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
From the Democratic Party, or see the Democratic Party as a vehicle.
I'm not hearing him. I'll go back just a little bit and see what's going on with.
Just fine-tuning this a bit.
Why?
And I'm sorry to hear you've been having trouble with your health. Wow, Dawn. Two were mild myocardial infarctions. Last one knocked me out for 10 days in the hospital. And you had trouble getting into hospital because of because it was full up. That's terrible. How's it going, Didi? Anyway, thanks everybody for dropping in. I hope I'm making sense.
Party, should be. See the Democratic Party as a
vehicle coming out,
of Wall Street and the war state. And of course, they're on the other side. But
I'm opening it up now.
The COVID narrative has
really
divided
coming through there.
Everybody, including within the left. There are fractures that hadn't existed.
Okay. This is not working properly.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's because I didn't have it turned on. I'm sorry.
Oh,
whoops.
Okay.
My fault.
Shall I go back?
Yeah, do that. Yeah. Whoops.
Now, in the U.S. at the moment, there's over 2,000 people dying a day.
Wow, we're really behind there, aren't we?
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. I realized that that's why, because I'm here. That's better.
Oh.
Sorry, we're having a bit of production problem here. Okay, so let's try it now.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Who are completely separated from the Democratic Party, or see the Democratic Party as a vehicle of Wall Street and the war state. And of course they're on the other side. But the COVID narrative has really divided everybody, including within the left. There are fractures that hadn't existed before, really since the coercive policies came in. And I wonder what you think. I mean, if you have an answer to that question, and what you think overall about what these policies and the overall narrative. I mean, it's obvious now there is a narrative.
Didi.
It takes a minute.
Okay, when he says, there's been a sort of a fracturing in the left, that's probably because people don't appreciate him putting out this anti-vaxxer stuff that's cherry picking and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's one thing that, there might be authoritarian measures being, like brought in or whatever's going on. I mean, he talks about later but it's another thing that he's conflating everything together to try and, and that's what we were talking about with Caitlin Johnson's article. It's kind of like trying to smush it all together to make it, you know what I mean? What do you think, Didi?
I think that, like one of the
I should have just let him continue.
One of the major, let him continue.
Maybe we'll just let him continue. Sorry,
well, let me just.
Yeah, sure.
I think one of the big things with this is that there's a conflation between the fact that people have no social support. I mean, if COVID did anything, I had really hoped, and I was seeing it in the beginning, it was showing up the defects of capitalism. It was showing up the fact that there is no social support in a country like the U.S., which is very capitalistic, absolutely kind of laissez-faire capitalist. And there's no social support for people. They're happy to let people become homeless. They're happy to let people, starve to death. And there's been almost no, there's no public health. It's disgusting the way they treat their citizens.
Anyway,
and COVID has shown all of those problems up.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, people are looking at these lockdowns or, people objecting to wearing masks. I mean, for God's sake.
Anyway, let's, should we just, Didi?
Okay.
I'm sorry, should we just go through the whole thing first and then talk
listen
about
to this whole thing?
Yeah, well, not the whole thing, but just the bits that we were going to talk about. It's just that I didn't really let much of it go by before I interjected. So what do you think?
Okay. Well, I really think we probably know enough. I mean, we could listen to it. We probably know enough about
he
what
goes
Max
into
says.
the bit about the global South and
I just wanted to say one of the things that really bothers me about this line that Max and some of these other people take is this, oh, well, people of color don't want vaccines. They're hesitant. They're suspicious. For good reasons because of this kind of thing. He uses the example of a New York Times article about people in Palestine. Having looked at that actual New York Times article, it said people are hesitant because what are you? You're talking about Kim?
No. Whipple, Dingle, Weedlepuffin.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, that's right. It isn't Grandpa's measles vax. It's actually an mRNA thing that's been in existence for 20 years. And this is a serious illness that involves clotting issues. It's not your typical flu thing. And we're not promoting vaccines. We're saying the fact is, Whipple, Dingle, Weedlepuffin, that vaccines keep people out of ICU. That's something that people that are anti-vax don't mention. That is the problem, that they don't mention that. So we're not actually. I actually waited a while, and I have my own concerns about the possibility of some side effect down the track. But I looked at the two,
particularly because they were wanting to give us AstraZeneca.
Yeah, which had some clotting
some known
issues.
Side effects.
Yeah, known side effects. It was a very, very small. There was a small number. I think it was like 3 people or something died of AstraZeneca in Australia. Was it, or was it 2?
Yeah, something like that.
But I looked at there's getting COVID and ending up in ICU, and at my age, what might be really, really, it could end up there and worse, or taking a vaccine which has been in existence. The mRNA is a technology that's been in existence for 20 years or more, and that it's, that I felt like at that point it's a no-brainer, particularly when there's the Delta variant and it's really contagious, and that the fact is that it keeps people out of ICU. There's 98% of the people in ICU are people that are unvaccinated. So that's a fact that anti-vaxxers like to ignore, and that is what I acted on. So I would prefer to stay out of ICU. I used to work in ICU. I'm a former registered nurse. I know what it's like in ICU, and I know that if you go into ICU and you've got COVID, you're likely to have all sorts of clotting issues. You could have strokes. You could have organ failure, kidney failure. It's not something to muck around with. So that's my position. I wasn't racing out to get a vaccine, and neither were you, Dee Dee. Yeah. We decided to get it because the choices were fairly clear at this point.
Yeah. No, Whipple-Dingle says used on humans for 20 years. No, it hasn't been used. It's introduced as a human vaccine recently, and that's mainly because it's been difficult to find a carrier. But the technology has been around for 30 years. It's well known. I mean,
that's
the
what I said.
Alternative has been to try and get the disease or something very similar to the disease and somehow inactivate that to kill the virus, or to actually get the live virus and kill it in some way or denature it. and use that as a vaccine. mRNA basically takes a part of that vaccine that has no chance of creating an actual infection, but will create an immune response. And that technology has been around for 30 years. How to create it as a mass vaccine, that's been something that's been developed in the last 5 years or thereabouts. So, no, it hasn't been used on humans in a mass way, but it's a known technology. I think it's way safer than the normal way of producing vaccines. And yeah, so I think if you understood the technology, then you would see that it's actually a safer mechanism than the normal way they do vaccines.
Yeah.
And the he says, do you understand that if you only prevent severe symptoms without preventing transmission, you've created a hardier host? No, you don't. You don't create a hardier host.
Okay, and by the way, like
you're the
Didi's
host.
got.
Hang on, just
yeah. I was going to say yes, but
not?
I was going to say that you've got some experience in this because you're a biologist and.
Yeah. You do understand when you create you prevent the severe symptoms. All it does is prevent the severe symptoms. It does not create mutations. It may end up, if you have enough people vaccinated, the mutations that happen that allow it to escape the virus, the vaccine, will become more dominant. Right now, but the mutations themselves come from the population that have the virus. The more people that have the virus, the more mutations you get. And there are millions of mutations. Here in Australia, we actually trace where a vaccine, when you get a virus coming into the country, they can trace where it comes from by the minor mutations. These so-called variants like alpha, beta, delta, and that kind of stuff are the variants of concern. They're the ones that make a difference. They're the ones like alpha was the variant that made COVID initially much more infectious, and delta makes it much more infectious again. And so far, it's been the virus that is more contagious, which has become the dominant virus, and that's why Delta is dominant around the world at the moment.
Yeah.
As people become vaccinated, the virus mutations that make the vaccine less effective will become the dominant ones, but they're not any worse. They're not any more infectious necessarily, and the vaccines don't cause that. It's just that when you have vaccines, those are the ones that appear. Those are the ones we see, and will continue to infect people. But they come from places where there are a lot of people who have COVID. So they tend to come from the places where there is very little vaccination.
Yeah.
I mean, in England, the Alpha variant came from England when COVID was endemic because they decided to go for herd immunity. The Delta variation came from India, where it was just spreading through the population in a massive way. That's how mutations happen.
Yeah.
They happen in a natural way. The more people who have the virus, the more mutations there will be.
Yeah.
The ones of concern are the ones that change the virus in some way that either make it more infectious or more resistant to vaccine.
Yeah.
But the vaccines don't make it more resistant. They don't create mutations.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for another objection now.
Anyway, the biggest thing like that really bothers me about some of these arguments, like the New York Times article Max referred to in this thing about Palestinians not wanting it. If you actually look at that article, they're saying things like, we've heard that if you have this vaccine, you will die in 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. Look,
do you want to
address that? I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
Risky behavior. Jesus Christ.
They come from people, well.
What comes from people with risky behavior? What?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what are you calling risky behavior?
People walk
risky
by one another.
Is not having a vaccine.
Excuse me. People walked by one another in Sydney, and they were like, what? They walked by one another. There was like a couple of seconds, and they were actually a fair distance apart, and they picked up the Delta variant.
Yeah.
Is that risky behavior, walking down the street?
Public health, basic public health practice is what was initially used against the virus. Basically, that people need to wear masks, they need to socially distance, they need to avoid large gatherings. All of those kind of things are public health, and they have nothing to do with vaccines.
You can actually still spread COVID and be double vaccinated, and that is because
people. I mean, it's never been. Nobody has said vaccines are going to stop people from getting COVID.
No, it didn't say it was going to cure people.
They reduce the chance of you getting COVID by about 80%. That means 20% of the people who are exposed to COVID would still get COVID. But they will not end up in, they're much less likely to end up in ICU or die, and that there's huge amounts of evidence.
That's interesting.
Who argues against that is not looking at the facts.
That's an interesting narrative. That people that have vaccinated are causing mutations. Where did you get that from? Because
Hang on. He's saying mass social distancing.
It's a he
Can
or
I
she.
Respond to this? Mass social distancing and all the reasonable measures are being relaxed because the vaccine has created a false sense of security. Well, I would argue against vaccine passports for that reason. I say, because people can still get COVID, then it's ridiculous to pretend that the vaccine passport means, you can't spread it.
Yeah.
And so public health needs to be employed. But public health, in order to stop COVID, means wearing a mask, being extremely careful, particularly with Delta, which is extremely infectious. Yeah. I mean, when we first saw the COVID thing happening, whenever we would go out, I would be the only person who went out shopping or anything like that. We were ordering food for delivery, and that was what was recommended. Stores were delivering them, and they would come and put bags of food at your doorstep, and the delivery people would then leave. There was never any contact, and still you have these bags that might contain droplets of saliva or something like that, which could potentially spread COVID. We would take the things, and anything we used we're going to use soon, we would immediately wash. Anything else we would put aside for 3 days.
Yeah.
And if you want to do that, yes, you can reduce the spread of COVID. Whenever we would go out, if I interacted at all, when I came home, I was very careful not to touch any
this
kind
was
of
right
orifice,
at the beginning.
to wear a mask. This was at the beginning.
Right
These
at the
are
beginning.
public health measures. I was very careful to do that. When I came home, I would take off my clothes, wash them, have a shower and stuff before I did anything.
And even
now, that will absolutely reduce the chance of getting COVID. But if you want to live like that, well, that would be helpful in terms of reducing all kinds of diseases. But that's a fairly extreme thing to expect people to do. If people are vaccinated, then they are less likely to get an extreme illness. They're less likely to end up in ICU. They're less likely to die.
Can you address that, Didi?
Which one? I survived COVID in February despite heart damage. Yes, good. Oddly grateful now for some immunity. I'm not taking an experimental injection.
Okay, there's some immunity.
Okay.
That's not going to last. That's going to last for 6 months, and then you're probably not going to be immune. Have any immunity.
The immunity does start falling off.
Yeah.
In 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
Both natural immunity and vaccine immunity, and it first off falls off in terms of you being able to get COVID. You are less, if you have a good immune system, a good antibody rate, you are less likely to get COVID.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's much less likely.
Yeah.
If you get it, now apparently, although that transmission, that ability to avoid transmission falls off after 6 months, the protection against the severe symptoms keeps going for some period of time. Now, COVID's only been around for a couple of years, so we don't have a lot of data for how long that kind of immunity lasts.
Yeah.
But every time you are exposed to anything like that, it's like a booster shot. And yes, if you get COVID, it's actually, the immune response is stronger than if you have a vaccine. That's because you are confronted with the entire organism, and you are also you have more of the organism to develop an immune response to, but you also have the chance of getting extremely ill or dying.
Yeah.
It's like, that which does not kill me makes me stronger, except it might bloody kill you.
Yeah.
And
it's killed a lot of people.
And it's killed a lot of people. There are over 2,000 people a day in the U.S. dying of COVID.
Yeah. And you're just lucky you don't have long-haul COVID, and you're lucky that you didn't kill you.
Yeah, it's lucky that you survived, and you said despite heart damage. Was that heart damage from the COVID or heart damage that you already had?
And
if it
also
was that you already had, that's...
Yeah. And also, if
you're lucky, because a number of people have had heart damage from COVID. COVID actually, because of the clotting, has created problems in various organs, including the heart, including the brain. There's people who've suffered things that are very like strokes as a result of clotting in the brain.
And kidney failure and stuff.
There's kidney failure, there's all kinds of...
It throws out clots. This particular virus, it throws out clots in the body, and it causes all sorts of, it can throw out pulmonary embolisms. And
it doesn't kill everybody. Obviously, some people, many people may have mild symptoms.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who have long haul COVID,
and of course there's the issue of big pharma is corrupt, and it's really problematic. But they also put out a good product that actually works, because if they didn't put out a good product, no one's going to want to buy it from them. And unfortunately, if they waited for 5 years for all the testing to be finished, there'd be millions of people dead. Because it turns out, and this is the fact, that people who are, and I'm not saying you're an anti-vaxxer, you might be, you may not be, it doesn't matter. But the fact is that a lot of people ignore the fact that it keeps people out of ICU, and pretty much 98% of the people in ICU that are there are unvaccinated. That's a fact that people like to ignore. Yeah. So if we waited for 5 years for every test to go on for this particular vaccine, there'd be millions dead. So we can take our choice. And if you wait for if you want to do what
Max Blumenthal, 4.5 million people
Max
dead.
Blumenthal pushes herd immunity, because he finds the whole thing very inconvenient, and he's bringing in every scienceless thing he can think of, including interviewing associate professors of economics to talk about a virus.
The idea that it's an experimental drug is pretty much at this point rubbish, because there's been millions of people who have had this vaccine, and there are some side effects that some small percentage of people have had, and those are actually known. People who talk about the virus will say, like with AstraZeneca, there is a possibility of clotting for something like,
17 in a million people, I think. 17.
One in, I think 2 million or something like that.
And for that one person, that's devastating, right? It's, having your life, losing your life, that's dreadful.
Yeah, but for the rest of the people, it keeps them out of hospital. It keeps them from getting extremely ill. Yeah. This is a good thing.
And then there's long-haul COVID, like Jen Dyes from Status Quo. She has long-haul COVID. She's had it now for like 10 months or something, or more, probably even a year. Close to it, no, probably about 10 months.
Yeah. And
it's been dreadful for her, and she's got that hypotension issues, and can't think straight a lot of the time. She sweats profusely and has fevers. This is like, this is 10 months later. So, and children are now getting long haul COVID, and children are in ICU. Yeah. This is not something that you can just kind of, it's majorly affecting people. And if you just let it run rampant throughout the world, guess who are the ones that are going to die at the fastest rate? It's going to be people in the global south. So what we do in the global north here, and also the fact that we're holding the vaccine patents over their heads and saying, we're not going to give it to you, it's fucking disgusting. It's disgusting to me.
Yeah.
What's going on. It's disgusting to me that people are trying to find any excuse. And I understand what's happening in the United States, how the government does not support the people, and that has contributed to the shit show there, right? But that same thing is not particularly happening here. So we're talking from a different position about how the government's handled it here.
Our government has a different shit show.
Yeah, we're a different shit show, but it's not the same kind of awful shit show that's going on in the United States. At least the government here, because they basically know it'd be a hellhole if they didn't support people during this pandemic. That's what governments are supposed to do. They're supposed to be public servants. So the government here has done what it was supposed to do, and that supported people financially.
Yeah. If people don't want to have vaccine, that's fine. The idea that they're trying to push other people not to have vaccine, or not to have any kind of lockdown or COVID measures, the people who are demonstrating are people who are saying they don't want to wear masks. Okay. They don't want to have any restrictions at all.
Okay.
You talk about public health, that's not what the the people arguing against vaccines generally are talking about.
Okay, can I read this? This is something that was put out, a Weedle-Puffin, says, we have yet to see the long-term reproductive side effects, a topic that received almost no attention. That's actually not true. As far as I've seen, we already know that there are acute reproductive side effects. Now, I'm assuming that you probably read the Grey Zone article. We did a whole video about that on Faint Signals from Vega. The Grey Zone article, Max Blumenthal interviewed a associate professor of economics about a gynecological obstetric, a menstrual disruption issue. That's very appropriate to do that, to interview an economics associate professor about something like that, as well as talking about COVID. That was the first problem with that article. Secondly, the two researchers that were investigating I think it was 40,000 women that experienced menstrual disruption. By the way, 40,000 women in a population of, and I don't know if that was just in the United States, a population of 330 million, is a fairly small percentage. Menstrual disruption caused by the vaccine, whichever mRNA vaccine it was a temporary side effect, and those two doctors should have been the ones that Max Blumenthal chose to interview, but because Max Blumenthal has got such a confirmed bias over all of this and is desperately trying to basically come up with anything throw anything at the wall that will stick, doesn't matter if it's scienceless, doesn't matter who the fuck he's interviewing, to prove this point that he doesn't want the vaccine and he doesn't want anybody else to have it, and he wants herd immunity, which doesn't really exist in this case. So, this is the problem with when journalists put their journalism aside and have a confirmed bias and are trying to find anything, cherry-picking information, interviewing people that have no expertise whatsoever. Why didn't he interview the two women, the two doctors that were actually looking into the menstrual disruption? Why didn't he interview them? Because it would be inconvenient to his narrative, that's why. And that is my problem. I love Max Blumenthal's work. He's done amazing work. He's an incredible writer, and I'm so disappointed that he's gone down this path because this is inconvenient to him. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if he has a problem with authority. I don't know if he's frightened of the vaccine. I don't know if he or if he's grifting to the right. I don't know what the fuck's going on with him, but I wish he'd fucking stop. And he's trying to conflate now, make a false equivalency between people, the left having a problem with the fact that the global south can't get vaccines because they're dangling patents over their head, and he's conflating that with the left not having a problem with the vaccine apartheid in the United States. I don't know how you can manage to put those two together, and he's interviewing people that are totally have no expertise whatsoever. He could have interviewed those two doctors, but he didn't. And instead, the person he did interview was shitting all over those two doctors, okay? So that's a really, really bad that article was really just poor journalism.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is that vaccines do keep people out of hospital, and they do keep people, from dying.
Yeah.
Not in all cases, not in every case, but in a huge majority of cases.
And look, we don't know what the side effects might be down the track, but I would rather take a chance on something that looks like it will probably work. It does work. It keeps people out of ICU. We know it works, right? And
the thing is, we know it works.
Or have the possibility of either having long haul or worse, ending up dead. I don't know if you've ever experienced air hunger. I had asthma when I was young, and that's nothing to what people that have air hunger with COVID experience, where they don't even know that their oxygen levels in their blood are dropping. They can have oxygen levels of 80%, and because this is such a weird disease, they don't even know that they have they don't even know that their oxygen levels are down that. And then suddenly they've got air hunger, and they basically, that's when it's really desperate. And if you've ever seen anybody dying, which I have, of air hunger because they've got lung cancer or something, it is fucking awful. So you don't want that. I don't want that. Who wants that? That's just one of the things that can happen. You can get fucking renal failure. Then you're really fucked. You have to go to a fucking dialysis center once or twice a week for the rest of your fucking life, if you're lucky. But usually people that have renal failure die. But if you get in renal, a lot of people die with renal. My mother died of acute renal failure. This is no joke. Or you can have a stroke and end up with basically, hemiparesis or worse. You can't talk. I mean, these are serious side effects of an illness, and I don't really want to risk that. I would rather risk the possibility of some side effect down the track than risk having that sort of shit show over COVID. And also, that's not just about me, it's about the fucking community, which a lot of people don't seem to have that sort of concern anymore. Fuck the community seems to be the way some people think, which I find is like a spiritual death of humanity, that we're at this point where it's like, I don't give a fuck what happens in the global south. Fucking open it up and let everybody who's weak and immunosuppressed and fucking diabetes and children that have got immunosuppression and cancer, let them all fucking die because I want to go to my favorite fucking restaurant and sit inside.
Yeah, I mean,
fucking disgusting.
Yeah, you were talking about, vaccines might dissuade people from using masks and public health type stuff. Well, the people who are opposed to vaccines, by and large, are absolutely opposed to masks, social distancing, any kind of restriction of anything. And the thing is, like Max keeps talking about, black people don't want it, and
that is bullshit.
That kind of stuff.
And that's the other thing.
Hang on.
Yeah, sorry. Go on.
Black people don't want it, but black people are actually more susceptible to bad symptoms which are, critical to their health or may kill them. And if there is suspicion, which there may be, and it may be justified, feeding that suspicion is not helpful.
No.
It is making sure that more of those people will get sick and die.
Oh, and that's the other thing. I was trying to interject there about the Palestinians. He made this claim in this video, if we ever get to it, that 80% of Palestinians don't want the vaccine. Now, in the beginning, Israel was not, the apartheid state of Israel would not give Palestinians the vaccine. And then when they decided to give it to them, it was an expired vaccine. And in one of the, they basically, they didn't want it. So they refused it. And then it was made out as if they refused the vaccines. No, they refused the fucking expired vaccines. Then Max Blumenthal is making out now that 80% of Palestinians don't want the vaccine. I'm not entirely sure that's true.
There's a New York Times article, that's the one I was talking about, that he refers to.
Yeah.
And that article, said that there's a lot of people who are suspicious. Well, I can understand why Palestinians are suspicious of people, but I mean, there's also been a lot of shit that's been told to them. I mean, things like, if you have this vaccine, you will die in 2 years.
Yes.
Well, if you tell people shit like that, well, sure, you're going to be hesitant.
Yeah.
But it's a lie.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's a
garbage.
Lie. It's a fucking lie.
And you can say, there might be, effects sometime in the future down the line. But there are side effects to virtually everything.
Yeah.
I mean, eating bacon will kill you.
Yes, that's right. There's side effects to every medication. You only have to look at the medication ads.
You look at the list of side effects on any potential side effects.
Yeah,
and they're freaking huge.
Look at the ads they have on American TV. Do you see how long it takes them to run through the side effects of each medication?
Possible side effects.
It's it's a list as long as your arm. I remember Whitney Cummings, that comedian. She advertises for a contraceptive, and she'll spend like a minute talking about the contraceptive, and then there's like 3 minutes of lists of all the things that can go wrong.
Possible side effects.
It's hilarious. It's almost like a bit. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's
the reality is that this was a pandemic that was affecting people, and people were dying. I mean, you look at what happened in Italy when that pandemic hit, and the hospitals were full, and they were letting people die because there were too many people to treat.
They were
and
triaging.
They were having to choose who was going to live and who was going to die. And the same thing started happening in New York City. And at that point, people started to get serious about masks and distancing, and that helped. But these people who, and then there was a rush to try and develop vaccines. Well, that's important because the consequences of not having something like that were a lot of people dying. I mean, in Australia, we managed to control and basically eradicate the virus here by and keep up our borders for a very, very long time. And that allowed us some breathing space. But in the United States, because they just ignored a lot of the health things for far too long, it became endemic, and it was everywhere.
And that's capitalism.
And in most of Europe, it was everywhere. It's endemic. There was no way that you could eradicate that. At that point.
And I mean, look at
the consequence of doing nothing was to have huge numbers of people die.
Look at how China managed that. They built that hospital in like a week. A huge hospital. Like, they take things seriously there.
And they did that on just public health with masks and lockdowns.
And they have almost 4 times the population of the United States. And look how they handle it. And that is I'm not saying that
China
is communist. I'm not saying China is all communist. China is a combination of communism and capitalism. It's weird, right? And yet they still manage to do that for the people. And Vietnam is the same. Vietnam is moving towards a socialist country. Vietnam, literally, they stopped exporting, and they stopped. They've worried about the people first, and then the economy second. That's what a socialist government does. And they literally, if people are having food shortages and stuff, they literally drop food in the streets, free food, tons of it to people. Like, that's how a government is supposed to work in a society where they look after the people and they're not obsessed with the economy. So, there's different ways that countries, you can see the difference between the capitalist shit show and the socialist or communist leaning countries and how they deal with disasters. And it shows up capitalism to be the shit show that it is, and that it's ecocidal, that it's anti-people, anti-non-human animals, it's anti anything that is good, I feel, and it needs to end. It fucking needs to end, and it's inextricably linked with imperialism, and it's fascism is capitalism in decay. What is good about that? Nothing. So anyway, that's sort of how this capitalist system has helped create the shit show that we've got now with COVID.
I've gone through in the past, like problems with big pharma and stuff like that. I'm very well aware of.
I don't have faith. Excuse me. I don't have faith in the machine at all. Do you follow anything about my channel? Weedle Puffin? Sorry. I don't. If you follow my channel at all, I have absolutely no faith in anything that's going on at the moment, really. We're all victims in this fucking shit show, capitalist shit show. If you'd pay attention to what I actually talk about on this channel, I talk about this often. Capitalism is mostly to blame for what's going on right now. And Big Pharma is fucking awful. They're as corrupt as all get out.
But science is science. And science, medicine is medicine.
And of course, science can be funded by different Big Pharma as well.
And people can take advantage of shit.
What you fail to seem to acknowledge right here and now is that, putting everything aside, it looks very much. The evidence is, unless you think this is a global conspiracy of every ICU unit in the world, right?
In all governments, socialist, communist, capitalist.
If you don't think that there's a conspiracy with every ICU unit in the world, then the vaccine keeps people out of ICU and keeps them from getting serious disease.
And now,
that's the bottom line for me. Pardon?
And right now, they're freaking free.
Yes, they're free. And that is why, and here we are in the fucking West, kicking back on it and complaining and rejecting it and going on. And here we've got the global South begging for it. What does that say about us? What a fucking disgrace we are, really. What a fucking disgrace. That's what it says to me. And the soon, honestly, and this is something I'm going to say now, and you can see how I feel about it. The sooner our species ends, the better. Because this is the sort of spiritual death we've had, including what we do to non-human animals. It's a fucking disgrace how we behave towards one another and non-human animals by not being vegan. So that's my ultimate view in this. I'm not happy at all being part of a species that behaves like this and dominates all other species on the planet and is destroying the planet. I'm not happy with that at all.
Yeah. And assuming, black people or Palestinians or something like that don't want it. I mean, it's like in Western Sydney, in the Islamic communities and the Asian communities, there was a lot of garbage being thrown at them about the dangers of that kind of stuff. And they had people from those communities who actually said, no, that's not true. That's how they started getting it through to those people. But, I can't help but think that some of the propaganda and garbage that is said about vaccines, the intention is to kill off more people of color. And more minority communities.
Yes. This
I
holding.
Actually think it's evil.
Yes, I think that this
withholding. They spread lies and bullshit to keep people from getting vaccines. In the hope that more of them get sick and die.
I'm sure the government's hoping that more fucking black people and keep people of color die during this COVID thing. Because and thanks to people like that putting out these conflated narratives and stuff and putting out all this scienceless information, we now have people reluctant to take vaccines because they think that they've been inundated with fucking bullshit. And that is sort of so we're all, anybody who's assisting in that is basically assisting in knocking off black people and people of color in other countries as well.
Yeah.
That's what and I'm sure that the establishment is rubbing their hands together, happy. We're devastating all these fucking countries with different national India and all of this, wiping out poor people. Happy. It's like a different kind of eugenics.
Yeah, they don't care, that people in the global South, people in Africa aren't going to get vaccines. Think of how many of them will die.
Yes.
Because not only are they going to end up with COVID and have bad symptoms and stuff, but in a lot of those countries, the medical care, the hospitals and stuff, they don't have the money thanks to frickin' imperialism.
And it's a gift that keeps on giving too. The longer people fuck around and don't actually sort of slow this down, the big pharma,
the more variants
and the more big pharma make profit and more profit and more profit. So the people that are actually anti-vaxxer are assisting big pharma in making more and more profit. And also assisting in basically, by refusing to get vaccinated and more variants finding hosts to mutate and everything. This is going to spread around the world, and we're going to be stuck with this fucking thing like the flu, except it's not like the flu. It's fucking dangerous. So we're going to have to be getting fucking boosters now. And I'm sorry to say this, but there may come a time where there's a variant that those people that have had COVID, just like Whippledeedle, Weedle, Punkum and whatever, are going to end up coming across a variant that is so fucking serious that they'll be fucking begging for something that will stop it. Basically, it's going to be really fucking scary. So it's like people might have survived one bout of COVID, and then they come across another time and it's not so great. Who fucking knows what that's going to be like? And anyway, so what if you survive one thing of COVID? What about all these other people that are immunosuppressed? Don't you give a shit about them? Like there's so many children on the planet. There are people, particularly in the United States, where the healthcare system is a fucking shit show, right? And there are so many people that have got chronic problems. I mean, I'm amazed, like how many people I hear their stories of how ill they are, and I think, oh my God, and they don't have any fucking health care.
Are just disgusting. Lot of it. The diet and the amount of
because,
high fructose corn syrup and everything.
Because
the incredible sweet.
Yes, because the big pharma over there want people to get ill. Because they want to pump out their fucking medication to all these ill people. And, hospitals want you to get ill so that you'll come out and leave with a $40,000 or $100,000 bill, which some people that have got COVID are coming out with massive bills. It's like, that's capitalism. That's why it's got to end, because this is sort of, America is like the extreme example of what we all can look forward to when it's at end stage capitalism. That's what Australia is heading towards, isn't it, Dee Dee?
Yeah.
They want to be like the US healthcare system.
Yeah.
So the sooner we bring down this fucking system, the better for all of us, because we're all going to fucking die under this system. Yeah. It's coming for all of us. And that person that was saying, I enjoy
Dawn.
being a part of the machine. Jesus fucking Christ, did they follow what I say on this program? On this fucking channel? Yeah. Christ I'm sorry. But that's just crazy stuff. I hate being a part of this fucking system. I hate that it's capitalist in this country and in other countries. I hate that we're oppressing countries that aren't capitalist, that are trying to do something for the people, and we're invading them and just trying to fucking destroy them. I fucking hate living in this fucking system. The whole fucking thing is a shit show. And then I hate that animal exploitation isn't even on the fucking radar screen, that most leftists don't even acknowledge. They're carrying on and wringing their hands about the environment, or carrying on and wringing their hands about violence, but don't even see what they're doing on their plates 3 times a day. All of that drives me fucking spare, and it makes me really fucking depressed sometimes. This is sort of like, I don't know. And this is just one more shit show to add to the rest of the shit shows. This whole COVID thing, as if we need this COVID thing on top. We're literally on the edge of extinction right now, and now we're all obsessed with COVID. Meanwhile, it's looking, we're looking at what, 3 degrees or so, 2.7 or something, and that's a conservative estimate by what? 2050?
2050.
2.7. 2.7. That's a conservative estimate.
That's
and here we are all fucking, I don't want my vaccines. Meanwhile, we're on the edge of extinction. Oh my God. We're too stupid to live. I'm sorry, but we are. We're too fucking stupid to live as a species. Yeah. We really fucking are.
Well, we won't.
No, we won't.
Yeah.
That's why we're going to go extinct, because we're too fucking stupid to live as a species. And we're so violent towards one another, fucking raping our young and killing our young and fucking all the shit that we do. Oh my God. Killing women by the fucking millions. You know what I mean? It's just, what a fucking nightmare we are as a species. Anyway, I can't even see that Michael. Somebody called Michael is. Can you see anybody called Michael there?
I know. No, if there's a Michael there,
and that person who is, going on about the vaccine, right? Yeah. Didn't acknowledge anything that you were saying. You just explained it very well. Yeah. And they just go on to this is the problem. They go on to a new objection. Do you know what I mean? They don't acknowledge.
It's like transphobes. There's always a new they'll always come up with more shit.
Yes.
And if they run out, they'll start recycling it.
Did you see that person once say, "Yes, you're right. The vaccine does keep people out of ICU." None of those people will acknowledge it ever.
No.
None of them will ever say yes.
People, I remember Max saying, whenever you talk about the problems with vaccines, people say, "Oh, but COVID is killing people. You're trying to kill people. Well, like, actually, people don't tend to say that. They tend to say, no, vaccines will stop people from dying.
Yeah.
They won't stop everybody from dying, but they'll stop a lot of people.
I don't see any. Oh, Michael Williams. Okay. I'm not sure why I couldn't. I've changed accounts and now I can see Michael Williams.
Oh. Okay, India. I can't see them either.
Okay. Well, either Michael Williams has us blocked or... Anyway, I can see what he's saying now. So anyway, he hasn't said very much. Anyhow, so what I'm saying is I often note that anybody who's immediately starts going on about, the vaccines and stuff, every time you address one of their comments, then they go to another one. And it reminds me of people against that don't want to acknowledge the problems with animal exploitation. And they're having cognitive dissonance. They just go from one objection to another, and it's really poor excuses, but it doesn't matter. Because they don't want to acknowledge anything and they don't want to think about anything. I'm not saying it's the same as what that particular person was talking about, like their attitude, but it seems like they didn't want to acknowledge anything that you said explaining that vaccine, Didi.
Yeah.
Or the ICU, the thing about vaccines and ICU. Yeah. So that's why it starts to feel like a bad faith, disingenuous thing when people won't acknowledge.
Yeah, when people don't acknowledge that, when they keep coming up with reasons, when people say, "Oh, but it should undergo 5 years of testing," well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, really?
5 years of testing, yeah. There'll be millions fucking dead by then.
Oh.
But that's okay, though, Didi. I can go to my favorite restaurant.
Vaccines make people not follow
But that's okay. We can all go to our favorite restaurants for 5 years until we can take it.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, there'll be millions of people dying.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, that's the hope that it's not them.
Yeah. Well, hope that one day when this is the same people, right, who are totally against this and won't acknowledge thing about vaccines and ICU. Wait until they can't they have something wrong with them and they cannot get into ICU if it's really serious, or into another part of the hospital because it's full of COVID patients.
Yeah.
Then they might think to themselves, uh-oh.
Yeah, maybe.
But what if their fucking partner has to go to ICU and they can't get in because it's full of...
One of the things that gets me about this is that so many medical people have been working nonstop in ICUs and hospitals and that kind of stuff since this pandemic started, and they're exhausted.
Yes.
They're totally exhausted. There's people who are just dropping out of the profession.
They've got PTSD.
Because they've got PTSD. It's like, it's nonstop.
Yeah.
And particularly, like we saw some of that in the beginning here, where people who got sick, or might have been infected, medical staff had to go into isolation in case they had COVID. Yeah. And that just put more strain on everybody else. And it's just, like, honestly...
And 3,700 healthcare workers in the United States have died from COVID. I mean, that is something that shouldn't be happening, that healthcare workers should be dying while looking after people that are sick, right? Like that. That's, and that's still going on, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what's going on with healthcare workers that refuse to get a vaccine. Seriously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're supposed to be protecting patients. I know it can't stop you from you're still going to have to do fucking mask wearing and stuff like that after you've had a vaccine.
Says no contact, no infection. Well, that's true. How do you stop any kind of contact?
Yeah. We live in a society.
Live in a bubble.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. It's not practical.
No.
And it's particularly not practical for people who don't have a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's like, that's why...
Densely populated areas.
Yeah. Densely populated areas tend to be areas full of poor people.
Yeah.
And those are the people who don't have as much medical care and don't have, it's a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
But to sit there and say, well, just don't, it's like, it really pisses me off when you get these people who complain about vaccines, and then when they get, or masks and stuff, and then when they get COVID, they get ivermectin and they get monoclonal antibodies.
Yeah,
and I think monoclonal antibodies, you have problems with mRNA, and yet you're getting monoclonal antibodies.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
And that costs about
and you don't think that's pharmaceutical,
and
or
that
what?
costs $1,500.
Yeah.
Like people like Joe Rogan can get stuff like that because they can afford it.
Yeah.
But other people don't have that luxury. So, anyway, and I don't want to get into the ivermectin thing. You can look up Dr. John Campbell. I put a link in the live chat. Have a look at what he says. He's a really fair... Oh, Jesus. Somebody almost pulled my headphones out. Hopefully they didn't disconnect it. So that was our little cat running through the under my desk. So so Joe Rogan can afford the monoclonal antibodies and anything else that he needed.
The thing is, they'll go to, big pharma for that.
Yeah, sure.
And yet
this is why this
vaccines,
is a very
big pharma, evil.
This is why this is a politicized thing, and that's why it's so unfortunate. Yeah. Because, that's why the conflation of all these different things, that's why we talked about the militarization of police on this.
Kim's going.
Oh, okay, Kim. Nice to see you.
We've been
I've been ranting.
Ignoring
this
people,
sort of makes me upset because I'm really tired of people who keep ignoring what you say and just keep putting out the same old, like that whole, what I just said to that person about the menstrual disruption. They didn't say anything back about that. Yeah. Right? I just addressed their point.
That whole menstrual disruption, most of it comes out of the VAERS stuff. And the VAERS stuff is basically anybody can, without any kind of evidence, say, well, I've had this side effect. And so you always get people who have the normal things that people get, like headaches. Yeah. People have heart problems. People have high blood pressure. All that. But that all happens anyway.
Yeah.
What those things like VAERS are good at is actually highlighting something that is unexpected.
Yeah.
If you suddenly find somebody having a bunch of people having an unexpected thing, that's the one you look at.
Yeah. Anyway, that thing that Max Bloom, we never really got to play this, and I wouldn't mind playing some of it, but that...
I'll play some of it.
Okay, listen, Didi, just wait a minute. That point he made about the Palestinians, 80% of them rejecting the vaccine, I don't know. He said it was a poll that was taken. I couldn't find any poll.
I
really find that hard to believe. It's 80% of Palestinians. I really do, and I really wonder. I really have to wonder about that, and we couldn't find that poll.
You look at Rania Kalek and people like that, and they're not. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. And if it's because they've been hesitant because of all the misinformation, he's not helping. Anyway, should we play some of that?
Yeah.
Because he's putting out loads of misinformation
being filtered into the. There's fear porn. There's coercive media. There's an information war. It should be obvious, but a lot of people on the left, many people I respect, are self-censoring, or they're not sure that they completely oppose it. So I wonder where you are on this issue.
Yeah, I think you kind of anticipated
when he talks about
question.
fear porn.
Again, I think that
I just want to say, when he talks about fear porn,
really
what do you think all this anti-vax shit is?
I know.
Enthusiastic about
it's going to cause birth defects, maybe in babies, or like
hide that and try to
fear porn.
Well, putting out that basically implying that women are going to have
fertility
all sorts
problems.
of fertility problems and stuff. That's not fear porn. I mean, that is. You cannot say that, and it has these. You cannot say that actually.
Anti-vaxxers.
And why didn't he interview those two doctors that were doing the research into menstrual disruption? Yeah. Why didn't he interview them?
Yeah.
That would have been normal journalism for him because he's a really good journalist. So I don't know why he chose to. I kind of know why. I can assume he didn't want that inconvenient information for them to actually to explain it in a logical, scientific way. He rather would interview somebody who's not at all remotely medical, like an associate professor of economics. Why would you interview somebody like that for an issue of menstrual disruption, Didi?
Yeah.
Why would you interview an economics associate professor about that? Anyway,
because they go along with your idea.
Yeah, they go along with your ideas. Anyway, let's watch some more.
Example.
Yeah.
I honestly haven't really talked to too many of those folks over the last couple months. Like I haven't talked to
hear it because
Aaron Mate or Katie Halper or some of these folks who seem to be, strongly against anti-vaxxers and whatnot. I'd love to kind of get their perspective, but I know one thing that Aaron mentioned in particular is that he talked about vaccinations in the third world and that he thought that they weren't getting enough vaccines. So that was indicative of the fact that, it's not this sort of conspiracy because we're not giving it to people who would need it. Again, I'd love to kind of discuss it with him, but I agree that I think it is sort of a danger now where these folks who have been consistently anti-imperialist may be getting divided themselves because of COVID.
Yeah, well, I think it's exposed a lot of contradictions within the anti-imperialist left. And also, there's an element of fear about being censored out of existence, which is, I guess, legitimate. But for me as a journalist, I went into the profession thinking that, in the end, you might wind up being very lonely by doing the kind of journalism that's necessary. And you can constantly offend people, including people around you, by telling the truth. So I'm trying to approach this journalistically instead of as an influencer or someone who's built up an audience that I need to maintain and cater to in order to maintain a living or my platform. And for me, it became really, I mean, I was mostly clammed up, even though I don't trust the government. I don't trust the US government. I mean, that's kind of my baseline impulse. And so I was suspicious about what was taking place throughout the pandemic, throughout 2020, particularly with the lockdowns. It just made very little sense to me, but I clammed up. And then once the vaccines came into mass production and it was clear that they were very leaky, what I always suspected they would be like, they don't prevent transmission. So it's an individual choice to maybe prevent severe illness or death if you want to take one, but it's not actually technically protecting others. That's something Fauci and CDC director Rochelle Walensky have both admitted to during the Delta variant, but I think which was always true. And at the same time, they're being pushed on the population in such coercive ways that the entire swath of the US population and the global population that is resistant to taking them is being demonized in much the same fashion that the Russians were demonized during the Trump era, or the quote unquote terrorists, and Muslim Americans were demonized during the Bush era. So I've kind of just had all of the trigger points go off, and I decided it was time to start kind of raising questions about where we were going, because it's obvious we're going to a place of kind of digital capitalist authoritarianism. Every socialist, I think, should be concerned when a capitalist order is going to impose digital vaccine passports as a ticket to society. And you see so much gaslighting on Twitter, including by leftists who say, oh, these are just like the vaccines we had to take when we wanted to go to school. And it's just like having a library card. Richard Wolff, who you've hosted on your program, I guess his penetrating insights on the economy don't translate well into the pandemic, because he likened vaccine passports and mandates to having a driver's license. And really, it's about being able to be a citizen if you follow a government mandate, which is encoded digitally into your smartphone, and you will have to provide a QR code to prove. And then they can tack on any other mandate while digital currency comes.
You can talk. There's a delay.
Okay, so can I talk?
You can stop.
Okay.
Talk.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's a delay.
Yeah, there's a delay. There's a delay. So sorry if I talk over things, stuff. So anyway, that's the sort of what Max is basically talking about. Did he get to the Palestinian thing?
I don't think so.
Oh, well, anyway, I think you get the gist of, he's basically conflating a whole bunch of issues, with vaccine. And there are things that he's saying that are just, what do you think, Didi?
Well, if he was straight up, he would be looking at these things separately. Things like the vaccine passports and the way it's used by government. That's one thing. Yeah. Talking about big pharma, big pharma is a problem. But in this case, like big pharma, the vaccine is free.
Yeah.
Big pharma, the biggest problem with big pharma here is that they're not releasing the patents so that India and places like that and Africa can make their own vaccines.
Yeah. Anyway, the thing is that, that I don't think, you can think that the vaccines are helpful in preventing people from getting severe disease and not ending up in ICU, right? And you can think that vaccine passports are a problem. And you can think that vaccine mandates are a problem.
And you can think big pharma is a capitalist, corrupt, awful organization.
Yeah,
and you can think that medical researchers have integrity.
Yeah, and some and others maybe not. And then you can also think that big pharma would want to put out a product that works because they want people to buy it, but also they want people to continue getting sick so they can keep having that product being used and put out millions and millions and make billions and billions of dollars. There are all these things that can happen all at the same time, and Max kind of conflates a whole bunch of stuff. And he also said something which was really bizarre, which I don't know if we got to. It's really hard for me to actually follow this video because I'm trying to follow it through the TV and all of this. So, but there was one point where he was saying something about it doesn't really stop you. Can you place?
It doesn't really stop people from getting COVID. Well, this is absolutely...
No, it was something about it doesn't really help you. It doesn't really help stop you from getting severe disease. He said something like that later on. No, but Didi, he actually said that later on, which is an absolute falsehood, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This is something that the people who are against the vaccines say that all the time. It doesn't stop you from getting COVID. You have as much of a vaccine, a viral load as people who are unvaccinated. Well, that's true, but that's not news.
No.
Fauci said that.
Yeah.
As
problematic as Fauci
when people, introduced the vaccines, they said that they were 80% or 88% effective at preventing you from getting COVID.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's not 100%.
No.
They've always said that there will be breakthrough cases.
Yeah.
They've never said there would be no side effects, but they've identified side effects, and they tell you what the side effects might be.
Yeah.
Or any good doctor does. Certainly it's in the news. It's out there. It's not a mystery. It's not being hidden.
Yeah.
Now, the idea that there might be some mysterious side effect we don't know about, you can discount anything on that basis.
Yeah. And listen, and
it gets, yes, it doesn't stop everybody from dying. Yes, some people who are double vaccinated will die. Most of those people are people with very strong preconditions or very old people. But the important thing is that almost all the people in ICUs and in hospital are unvaccinated people.
Yeah.
Getting a vaccine will make it much less likely you'll get COVID, and B, if you do get COVID, it will make it much less likely that you will have severe symptoms. It doesn't make it impossible. It makes it much less likely. It's about probabilities. And when you put those two things together, that it makes it less likely you will get it, and if you do get it, less likely that you will have severe symptoms, it's an important thing. And the thing is that these things we know, and there are enough people out there who've had vaccines that you can see that there are no major side effects. You know, is it possible there's something unknown? Sure, but is it possible a meteor might hit the Earth, you know, next week? Well, that might happen too.
Anyway, we've been through that any medication can have loads of side effects. They have it on every ad on TV.
But I mean, it's disingenuous. It's an argument. They talk about in science good theories, and a good theory is something which can be disproved. The idea that it might have an unknown side effect somewhere is not any kind of theory, because there's no way you can disprove that. Except by, you know, waiting for a generation or something like that. And seeing what the effects are. And that's insane. To say, let's wait for a generation. Let's test it for another 5 years. I mean, it's just wrong. And all of this stuff, he comes up with is just in the service of saying vaccines are no good. He doesn't really argue the point about vaccine passports and the problems of that.
No.
Now, there are arguments against it. I actually think they're a bad idea. And I would make arguments against it. He doesn't. Michael, he makes arguments against vaccines.
Okay, Michael, I don't know if you're new to this channel, but no, I do not have a fundamental... your government, if you're living in the United States, I totally get why you don't have trust in your government. I don't trust this government. Do you know anything about this government here? It's a Scott Morrison government that is... He believes in the rapture. He's a Pentecostal Christian, and he absolutely would have let COVID go everywhere if it hadn't been for the states. Do I trust the government here? No, I do not. Now, I'm not exactly sure...
Do we trust the U.S.?
Now, listen, I'm not exactly sure what you're citing with that, Michael. Like, I'm not sure what
I can't see his thing. I don't know what he's saying. It doesn't appear here.
He said, I think the basic problem here is that Trish and Dee, despite their politics, have a fundamental trust in government, and people like Blumenthal don't. I don't.
That's rubbish.
No, that's rubbish.
I don't trust the government.
No, at all. At all. But we happen to have a pandemic.
I do trust science.
We do have a pandemic.
I do trust facts. And the fact is that vaccines do reduce the chance of getting COVID, and they do reduce the severity of symptoms if you get it. And that's a fact, and you can see it in hospitals, and you can see it in every country. You can see it in communist countries, you can see it in Cuba, you can see it in China, you can see it in Russia, you can see it in the United States, you can see it no matter where you look. And unless you're postulating that there's some, you know, mock something or other, like people say all mass shootings are all just crisis actors, or moon landings are all stage sets. You know, if you believe that kind of stuff, don't talk to me about being gullible. You know? Well, because that's just garbage.
The vaccine passports, I can see they'll be used to exclude different groups from different things. That's going to be something that the governments will exploit. And vaccine mandates,
the vaccine passports, my biggest issue with that is that it will, in the mind of a lot of people, make people think that, oh, well, they've had a vaccine passport, they can't get it. And it will reduce the number of people who take measures to prevent, you know, common sense public health measures, like wearing masks in a crowded environment. Like if you're going to go to a crowded environment, at least wear a mask.
Yeah, the vaccine passports, so like they want to have they want to have something like that in Australia, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're talking about. And that can now, I don't have the same sort of attitude that some people have in the US that I've heard of, where they, like, for example, Don Lemon on CNN saying, oh, well, just let them fucking die or whatever, if they don't want the vaccine, and if they're sick, then favor the person that has had the vaccine over that. I don't believe in that. I think that's wrong, and I think that callous attitude is really, really not. It's really unfortunate, right? And I prefer I prefer the government provide incentives to people to have vaccines. But the difference between
education,
the difference between the United States and the community, lots of the population there, because they have such a tremendous distrust of the government, and the difference here is that even though the government can't be trusted to some extent, they're forced into situations, the federal government, by the states where they have to do the right thing. Isn't that true, Didi?
Yeah, basically it's been the premiers that...
Yeah, the premiers, right?
Basically equivalent of governors in the U.S. who have said, no, we will protect our people.
And as Didi says, and we've said this over and over again, something that people who are against vaccines will never admit, that the vaccines do keep people out of ICU. Unless you think there's a great global conspiracy between every ICU on the planet, it actually is a fact that it keeps people out of ICU and keeps them from getting severe disease, right? So that's something
we're repeating ourselves now.
Hey?
We're repeating ourselves
now.
I
know. But I mean, it seems like you have to say it over and over again. So, that's the... So we have less of a shit show here because of the state premiers than you have over there. It's almost like you've got all these 50 countries or something within one country. They all do their own thing, and if you don't have a unified,
are doing stupid things.
If you don't have a unified response to this COVID thing, which would never happen in the United States, then you're going to have the shit show and the endemic situation now that you have, as well as having a capitalist government, neoliberal government that cares more about the economy than it does about people, and uses any sort of disaster to clean up assets and throw people out of their homes, the eviction crisis and all of that. At least here we've got, at this point, I'm sure they want to get rid of this eventually, but we've got some social support system, which is what governments are supposed to do. But until we get rid of capitalism, we're always going to have this situation where governments care more about the economy and the politics of disposability in relation to people happens. So, that is the center of it, is capitalism, and that it has to end. And we'll never ever have any sort of decent response to this or anything else, or any sort of real social support for people, all people, not just their buddies and corporations, etc. Until capitalism is done away with, that's what we've got. We've got this shit show. We've got a shit show here, not as bad as the United States by any means. Right, Didi?
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I don't trust the government. But I mean, look, what am I going to do? I trust evidence that vaccines work, keep people out of ICU. That's all I can say. And I had the choice of maybe dying of COVID, getting long-haul COVID, and all of that, or taking a vaccine, which the mRNA thing's been around for a while. Who knows? There might be side effects down the end, but I would rather. I thought, well, I'm going to go with the vaccine because I don't really fancy dying of COVID or getting long-haul COVID or having kidney failure or having a stroke and all those things all those fun things that people are having now. That's all I'm saying. I'm not a vaccine promoter. That's just the choice I decided to make. And I don't believe in mandated vaccines. I don't believe in vaccine passports. And I don't believe in treating people that haven't had a vaccine like second-class citizens. No, I don't. I don't believe in any of that.
But I absolutely believe that that it is necessary to have restrictions and public health type of things until everyone who wants to be vaccinated is vaccinated.
Okay. Here's another objection by Michael Williams. I wonder if this is not Weedle Puffin Weedle.
Okay.
Coming back as a different person.
What's that?
Okay, you don't trust the government, but you trust the vaccine that is being provided by government. Do you take any medication, Michael? You don't have to tell me what it is, but do you take any medication? Because if you do, then you're trusting Big Pharma. Because the vaccine is just one product out of bazillions of products that Big Pharma put forward. And with each product, there are many, many side effects of every product, and yet we still take them. Yeah. Right? We still take them because they, unfortunately...
The government provides public libraries. I use them.
Do we have time?
Government, I'm sorry, government didn't provide vaccines.
No.
Government did not provide vaccines. Medical researchers provided vaccines.
Yeah.
Now, pharmaceutical companies may exploit that. Governments have actually, spent money or whatever, and provide vaccines for free to people. Yeah, which. Thank fucking God. I mean, if you had to pay for the vaccines, people would really be fucked.
Yeah.
But I mean,
if we waited 5 years for everything to be sorted out with the vaccine and all testing to be finished on bazillions of animals, by the way, which is a whole other issue that I have a problem with. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, honest to God,
there would be literally
vaccines,
millions of people
Cuba's
all over the world.
Vaccines.
There would be millions of people all over the world would be dead by the time they waited the 5 years, right? So, that's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate that we can't wait 5 years. I don't want to wait 5 years and have tens of millions of people die, particularly in the global south, because they have to beg for vaccines. Yeah. And here we are, oh, should I take it? I don't want it. I don't want it. And you can't tell me to have it. You can't tell me to have it. And I'm not going to do it for community. Fuck community. I want to go to my favorite restaurant and I want this lockdown to be over, or I want this whole thing to be over so I can go into my favorite restaurant. That's sort of a lot of that is coming from inconvenience. Oh, then of course,
or just I hate government. And
I hate government.
I hate government. Everything government does is evil.
It's like shooting yourself in the face, cutting your nose off to spite your face, because there's no sense. Like, for example, I hate this Morrison government. You should have seen me when they got in. I almost felt like I was going to have a panic attack.
Yeah.
I was so distraught that they got in. Not that the other side is great, but I almost had a panic attack, right? Yeah. But I mean, I don't trust them, but I do trust science, and I do trust, and I keep saying it over and over again about vaccine and ICU. That's all I can say about it. And I also care about community. I don't want people to die. I don't want immunosuppressed people to die. I don't want people in the global south to die. I don't want them to use this as a way of knocking off black and brown people all over the world because they're withholding the vaccine. Do you? I don't. So, I don't trust, you can have a whole bunch of things that are all different at one time. Not liking mandates for vaccines, not liking vaccine passports, thinking the vaccine probably works, keeps people out of ICU.
Thinking the government is going to exploit the situation.
Big
like
government,
they exploit almost any situation.
Yeah, government always exploits a disaster to crack down.
Capitalists exploit anything they can.
Yeah, so, look at 9/11, and we're suffering because of 9/11 here in Australia with militarisation of police since the 9/11 thing. It didn't suddenly happen and in COVID like Caitlin Johnson kind of implies and what Max Blumenthal implies in his Twitter thing. It's been happening since 9/11. And that's another gift that keeps on giving from U.S. empire and imperialism and capitalism, since, it's all related. So, it's like, I just would like people to stop conflating all these political issues because they don't want to take a vaccine, and they're using anything they can, whatever sticks on the wall, they're throwing it to try and make sure that it becomes endemic so they can get back to whatever the fuck they were doing before this happened. Well, it's never going to go back to that. they've helped now make it endemic with all these narratives. They've also put hesitancy with Palestinians. Thanks very much for that, if that's what's going on. Yeah. Thanks very much. Hesitancy with black people. They've already got a distrust of the government because of all the experience the government's done on black people, right? So create hesitancy for them with the vaccine when they're 3 times more likely to die of COVID. That's great. What a fucking great thing that is to do to people.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyway, we probably talked. We could probably play. I would like him to play that bit where he says that it doesn't stop severe disease, Didi.
Okay. Well, I can see if I can find it.
Just hang on a second, and then we'll probably wrap it up.
It goes on for an capacity hour to make a financial transaction.
Is it you started yet?
Without it being monitored.
It goes on for an hour. Well, I've
shut off. So this is a new reality that's very disturbing to me. It amounts to a social credit system. A lot of the policies that are coming into effect are policies that the liberal democratic West always mocked and derided, quote unquote, totalitarian states, socialist states which are under siege from the empire for doing. For example, Australia now requires citizens to get permission to leave. And they're putting returning travelers into quarantine centers. Those who don't quarantine have to sign up for a facial recognition app and report their location and submit to random tests. If they don't provide their location within 15 minutes, police show up at their door. These, along with the social credit system, are what Americans and American exceptionalists always attack the Soviet Union and China for doing. But unlike the Soviet Union and China, the US and Australia, they don't really live under siege from more powerful military and economic forces. So what's the justification here? What is the public health benefit? To me, it seems like control and an effort to suppress resistance to the preservation of global capitalism. We can talk about that more in detail, but back to censorship and I guess back to your point about the global South and getting vaccines to the global South and this whole concept of vaccine apartheid. You don't see a lot of the people howling about vaccine apartheid talking about segregationist measures in the countries they live in that are coming into effect. They seem to be standing by silently or supporting them. And at the same time, in some sectors of the left, there's this concept of listening to the voices of the subaltern and people in other countries. Well, we have this huge controversy exploding right now with Nicki Minaj. I'm not a big fan of her music. Like, some of her early verses were pretty good, but then when she went pop, I thought it was really trashy and never gave her that much credit. But now she is articulating the feelings of a lot of people in the global South about an exported or imposed biomedical despotism that they're deeply uncomfortable with. And she's defending herself in a pretty effective way, and also kind of exploding the bipartisan division over COVID, the culture war. And she has been called apparently by the White House and told to step down. I mean, it all started with her talking about people in Trinidad and Tobago she's related to, who were having adverse effects. And they didn't sound like any adverse effects I've ever heard of, but that's how a lot of people in the global South feel about this. And you're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to talk about polls in Kenya, for example, or other parts of West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa that show that less than 10% of people are eager to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Senegal, countries like this, where a vast majority of people say that they do not consider it a major disruption to their lives. You're not supposed to share a New York Times article, which was very condescending, but shows poll numbers from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip of Palestinians who say in large numbers, like over 80%, that they do not want to take a COVID-19 vaccination. And there are Palestinians making very cogent arguments about wanting to wait to see that it's tested. over the course of 3 to 5 years, as other vaccines previously have. Couldn't we understand why they do not want another Western aid package coming straight from USAID injected into their arms? Seems actually pretty rational, but the New York Times reporter says they're victims of disinformation. We recently seen in the past week protests in Tehran that were completely not covered by Western media against vaccine mandates there. And people I've corresponded with in Iran say that a bare majority of those protesting are in the religious or revolutionary camp. That you've seen thousands of people protest in Turkey. This isn't just a Western phenomenon. And people who say that, the real problem here is the failure to get them vaccines. Well, I have no problem. Like personally, I wouldn't have any problem with getting access to vaccines that have shown that they can reduce the severity of illness. And I know people who want them, but they're not actually looking at the reality or recognizing that there is there is an ulterior agenda here. It's not just about public health. We can see in certain states in Nigeria, for example, that people are being cut off from their ability to go to the bank unless they submit to vaccine mandates. Where is this coming from? I mean, from their perspective, it's coming from the West, these policies. It doesn't feel authentic. You have a large part of the population that exists in the informal economic sector, that will not survive lockdowns and that can't abide by a lot of these mandates. What will happen to them? I think these are things that need to be considered. I think this is what is so unsettling about what Nicki Minaj said. It's why the White House is trying to co-opt her. She right now is far more threatening and unsettling to the centers of power in the US than anything said or worn by the second most famous self-styled socialist, AOC.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really didn't have Nicki Minaj on my radar at all. I'm not really a fan of her music either, to be candid. But I was quite surprised how outspoken she was, and I was quite surprised how outspoken she was.
Okay, so anyway, have you turned your mic on, Didi?
I have now.
Okay. So anyway, that's a lot of fun. And did he get to the point about the vaccines not stopping severe disease anyway? I didn't hear him say that, but he did say that. It must be further on. I don't know exactly where.
I think it's the argument that they don't always stop.
Anyway, what on earth is he doing bringing up Nicki Minaj, for goodness sake? Her cousin's friend had swollen testicles, supposedly from the vaccine. Who knows? Who fucking knows if that was from the vaccine? It could have been from some random sexual encounter. Who knows? But what on earth is he bringing up Nicki Minaj of all people, as if that's some kind of a strike for freedom? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. What kind of journalism is that?
Yeah.
What do you think, Didi?
Oh, well, I think it's just it's just picking up stuff.
Yeah, it's waffle.
Anything that you can throw. It's like you say, it's picking up everything and throwing it at the wall to see if anything will stick.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it comes from, TPG or whatever it's called, TPR, what is that gossip site?
TMZ. Anyway, should we? TMZ, I really like to,
or whether it is some fantasy, or whether it's.
Dawn says maybe a tick bite for the swollen cojones.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really do want to find that bit though where he says about, because that shows how kind of desperate he is that he's even saying that the vaccines don't stop severe disease. I'm sure he said that. a lot. So maybe we can put it on fast forward, Didi. Like, can you put it on 1.5?
Yeah, it's a long bloody...
Okay, Didi, can you just put it on 1.5 and we'll see what happens?
Okay.
I really want to see that bit.
You really do?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should have probably... I'll put it on 1.5.
Can we turn our microphones off?
Yeah. Okay. Ready?
Just thought that was amazing, that capitalism builds up these celebrities, and then if you have one start speaking genuinely or going off script, that can really jeopardize the narratives. So, I was emboldened by that. I thought that was pretty awesome. But you have to wonder.
This is where we are. This is where we are in the U.S. right now, where it's just random people coming out and speaking out and threatening power. It's not who we typically expect, and those who we would expect to challenge power, who define themselves as socialist, are fully invested in the contemporary system and trusting the experts and so on. So, I mean, I'm thinking of Bernie or AOC. Right. And then you have Tulsi Gabbard basically fully embodying the harshest critique of herself after she did at one point actually threaten the national security state.
Yeah. And again, I think that's really the only kind of hope to push back on, on these initiatives really is celebrities, because even like from a political perspective, it's fallen into a really kind of partisan divide where it's this battle between these kind of Trump supporting governors like DeSantis and the federal government. Yeah. I think, it's got to be coming from people like Nicki Minaj and Joe Rogan, who are kind of raising concerns among average people outside of traditional left-right politics.
Yeah, a quick comment on Joe Rogan. He got COVID. He was demonized because he's raised questions about the new normal, about the official narrative. The same way, those of us who've raised questions about official narratives on, foreign policy or dirty wars in the Middle East have been demonized, but in a much darker way. You can sense in the demonization there was a hope that he would actually die for questioning
they openly and that's one of the just most eye-opening things too, is the fact that you have all these liberals online cheering when anti-vaxxers die or mocking it. It's really sickening.
Yeah, and it's encouraged at the highest level. I mean, you can see the CDC's hand in pushing this kind of fear-mongering. It encourages self-censorship too. If you're a public figure and you want to speak out, just keep in mind, if you get COVID, everyone's going to be cheering for your death, and if you somehow die of it, well, then people will celebrate your death. But what actually happened with Joe Rogan was that he came out and boasted about taking early treatments. He recovered in 2 days. He did what you're supposed to do, what people who are fully vaccinated, who get breakthrough cases, which is happening more and more, should be doing to stay out of the hospital, which is to go get monoclonal antibody treatments. Like, if you're watching this, I don't give medical advice, but so many people that I know and doctors I've spoken to who prescribe early treatments have had great success with monoclonal antibodies. I don't know if they even have any side effects, and you just go to a local clinic. There's a national network where you can just put in your zip code and find out about a clinic to get monoclonals. And Rogan then, he said he used the I word, ivermectin. For some reason that inspires so much anger and hatred. And he said that he took ivermectin in combination with monoclonals and lots of vitamins, and he recovered. And obviously he doesn't have comorbidities. There are a lot of people who do have comorbidities who might actually, they can't do what Joe Rogan did. And that's who vaccinations are for. But the point is, another prominent athlete around the same.
Okay, so I think it's still going there. Oh,
no.
Okay, so Max is basically saying about monoclonal antibodies, which cost about $1,500 to get them. So he's not okay with the vaccine, but he's suggesting that anybody who gets COVID to go out and get monoclonal antibodies that cost $1,500.
Products of genetic engineering.
Products of genetic engineering. So he's okay with that sort of big pharma, but he's not okay with the big pharma that makes the vaccine. That makes no sense to me at all. And it also shows a level of privilege that he thinks that everybody's got $1,500 they can just blow where they could get a free vaccine. No, he says, no, instead, go out and get monoclonal antibodies and spend $1,500. If that isn't fucking privilege, what is? Suggesting that anybody can just blow $1,500. When they get COVID, by the way, this is after they get it, which doesn't guarantee that it's always going to turn out well, particularly if you're immunosuppressed. Like Joe Rogan, I don't think is immunosuppressed. He looks fair. He shouldn't be healthy because he eats animal products by the shit ton. But he went out and got himself money. These people have the money to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So that's a real problem to me.
Yeah, and I just want to say about monoclonal antibodies. Monoclonal antibodies are not something that will give you the same immune response as a vaccine will. Basically, they are as if somebody else had the vaccine, and you've gotten the antibodies from that person and use those antibodies rather than produce your own. And so you don't end up with the memory cells creating memory templates. You don't end up with the same kind of immune response. All you do is it helps stop you from getting the severe symptoms, because you're using somebody else's immune response. Now, in this case, it's the immune response that comes out of bacteria, a genetically engineered bacteria.
Yeah.
You get an antibody. You basically code for that and then have bacteria produce it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say something
unless
about...
you're having it produced in mice.
I was just wanting
goats.
to say something about Michael Williams said, what he said about Palestinians may be true. Those people have been living in an open-air prison years, and I can see them not wanting medicine from their enemies. Exactly. But that's true. I just want to
read you some of this New York Times article. I've got it here.
Just wait a minute. The vaccine thing, when they offered Palestinians expired vaccines, that's really unfortunate. But Palestinians have access to the internet. It's not like Pfizer is specifically, or Moderna is specifically for Israel. It's actually available all throughout the world. So unless they're getting tampered with vaccines, they should be able to. Hopefully, they can see what, them opening up the vaccines and new vials for each vaccine or whatever. But yes, they should have a healthy, definitely within apartheid Israel, the way the Israelis left them abandoned, for ages, wouldn't give them vaccines, hoping probably they'll all die, and that's another way of mowing the grass, as Netanyahu used to call it. And they refer to mowing the grass, getting rid of Palestinians, the ongoing genocide in apartheid Israel. But anyway, yes, but the thing is, they do have access to the internet, and they can see all the disinformation, and they can see also information that the fact is that it keeps you out of ICU, that sort of thing. Anyway, you might want to share that article, Dee, about...
Okay, well, I'll read some of it. It's by Adam Razgan. Bethlehem, West Bank. Since the coronavirus first emerged in the occupied West Bank, Suha Gadian has worn her mask assiduously, avoiding mingling with friends, and declined to host family members or attend public gatherings. Well, that's good public health stuff. But Miss Gadian, 41, the membership director at the Bethlehem Chamber of Commerce, has refused to receive COVID vaccine, worrying about side effects like blood clots, heart complications, and hair loss. While some damaging side effects have been found, they're extremely rare, and health experts say the benefit of getting vaccines far exceeds the risk.
Hair loss?
Hair loss, yeah. I've never heard that one before.
No.
I'm strongly opposed to taking the vaccine now, she said. I would only be comfortable after a 3 to 5 year study proves it's safe to get. Well, by that time, everybody in Palestine will have had COVID.
Yeah. Who's that? Who said that?
Somebody they're interviewing.
Oh, yeah.
For months, the Palestinian authorities in West Bank and the blockaded Gaza Strip struggled to inoculate residents for want of vaccine supplies. In other words, they wanted to inoculate people and didn't have the vaccines.
Yeah.
Now they've received millions of doses, but they're facing a new challenge, persuading a majority of the public to get the shots. We've got vaccines, but urgently need people to get vaccinated, said Shadi al-Laham, the top health ministry official in Bethlehem district. They're critical to helping us get through the pandemic. The number of new cases of the virus in the West Bank and Gaza jumped significantly over the past week, reaching 868 in the West Bank and 1,021 in Gaza on Friday, the highest single-day figure in months. The number of hospitalizations in both territories has roughly tripled in the last 2 weeks. And remember, the bloody Israelis were bombing and wiped out the chief internists in Gaza, and were bombing all around the hospital.
Yeah.
but only 37% of eligible and they're still under sanctions.
Didi, it would have been good, Didi, if you put that up on the screen, but it's all right.
I'll see if I can.
No, that's all right. Don't worry. You can read it. That's okay. Yeah.
Only 37% of eligible West Bank residents have received at least one dose of vaccine, and about 18% in Gaza, according to health officials. Disinformation and conspiracy theories, along with more well-founded concerns about waning vaccine efficacy, have contributed to widespread hesitancy, according to Abdul Salam Al-Kayat, director of the Public Health Department at An-Najah University's medical school in Nablus in the West Bank. Many people simply are not receiving reliable information about the vaccine.
Yeah.
This is the actual article that he's referring to.
Yeah.
Bethlehem, where the first confirmed cases of COVID-19 were found, may have been harmed the most. In addition to causing at least 258 deaths in the region, the virus has ravaged the tourist industry. I'll skip a little bit. I read online that people will die 2 years after they take the vaccine, said Isa Abdul Halil, 53, citing an unfounded rumor as he sold a watermelon to a customer. So I decided I'm not taking the vaccine. Why would I risk it? My health is excellent.
Anyway.
This is the kind of thing that is in there. There's nothing about a survey.
Yeah.
There's nothing about anything like that.
And by the way, I just want to point something out. This is speculation, okay? But like he mentions Tulsi Gabbard in there. He obviously stands Tulsi Gabbard to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And you know when Tulsi Gabbard did the full mask off about the Haitian refugees and them being murderers, basically not murderers, drug dealers and
rapists, and
she didn't say rapists, but drug dealers and drug
criminals,
cartels,
murderers,
and all that. All that's the Trumpian sort of narrative about immigrants and stuff. That they're all very bad people, bad people. Well, that's what she was putting out the other day, and she's also put out things about drones are okay, and never made any comment about the family that was killed in the drone bombing as a sort of a revenge attack to make Biden look good. The drone killing of those 10, and 7 of them were children. She never talked about that on Tucker Carlson. She just sort of said how great the drones were, and she's already mentioned that earlier in her years ago. She was still propping up the whole drone thing as being good, and she was the war on terrorism. She keeps pushing that tired old narrative that was really just bullshit to basically increase surveillance and invade countries, etc. So she's done a full mask off, right? Anyway, this whole thing about the Haitians that she put out recently, without actually saying their name, saying their race or anything, their country. She put that out on Twitter, and Max Blumenthal hasn't said anything about that at all, Didi.
No.
Everybody else has noticed that pretty much, except for the people that have stand Tulsi Gabbard. Even Jimmy Dore made some reference, not on his actual. He endorsed something that Ron Placone said about Tulsi Gabbard, right? But I'll be interested to see if Jimmy Dore does a video about Tulsi Gabbard, which he would normally do. If it's AOC, he'll do everything that AOC does that's wrong to him. But if he doesn't do this thing about Tulsi Gabbard with the complete mask off, saying the most racist stuff, right?
Yeah.
The most white nationalist stuff you can say, pretty much, using Trumpian narratives. If he doesn't say that, then, how can you really, truly trust people that stand politicians or people that were politicians enough that you'll just ignore something so sort of, like she's kind of really moving in a direction that is like, she could end up being the next competent fascist in 2024 or 2028. At the rate she's going with the kind of narrative she's putting out there, she's an Islamophobe, she's a transphobe, she is pro-Israel. She really likes Modi, who's is an incredible Islamophobe and a fascist. There's all these things that she's putting out there, and Max hasn't mentioned any of it lately at all. He stands Tulsi Gabbard. Jimmy Dore probably won't do a video on her. If he does, I applaud that. This what is going on here? And Max Blumenthal is retweeting Fiorella Isabel that was putting out Trumpian narratives about stealing the election. And by the way, just recently an internal memo was leaked about the Trump administration knowing that the Stop the Steal thing was all bullshit, that the electoral fraud was all bullshit. Anyone with half a noggin, half a neuron could see that was just him trying to hang on and hang on and hang on. But we had to hear about an internal memo now that's been revealed, right? Has Fiorella Isabel put that out from the Convo Couch? Has she posted that it was all a bullshit? And where has Max Blumenthal, what, you know what I mean? This is what I'm saying. There's this, it's like this sort of this, and I don't mean to sound mean or anything, but it feels like there's this grifty thing happening to the right. Fiorella Isabel and the Convo Couch have already embraced that. They're also anti-vaxxers, it seems. I don't know. It seems like that. And Max Blumenthal is kind of doing these sort of weird things now like that, and protecting Tulsi Gabbard, not talking about her, and this, like, he would have done that immediately if AOC had said something like that, but he hasn't said anything about Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe he said it somewhere, but I don't see it on his Twitter. Yeah. And I would have thought that would have been the first thing he would have said about her, because she's going to run again. I see that whole mask off thing. I know I'm going off on a tangent here. That whole mask off thing she's doing is a big grift to the right, and this is the beginning of her 2024 presidential campaign, and she's saying, "Here, guys, look at me. I'm sort of right on board with Trump when it comes to, this whole, like, it's almost like a white...
got back from Africa.
Yeah, it's almost a white replacement theory. Yeah, she said recently, I just got back from Africa, and Abby Martin joked and said, oh, look, I just got back from Africa where I was killing people. She loves the military, and she loves the drone program, and she completely ignores the fact that 90% of people that are killed in the drone program are civilians. But the whole thing is bogus, just extrajudicial killings from the air of people you don't know who the fuck you're killing. So the whole thing is a disgusting international war crime. So but anyway, I've lost my train of thought there. But anyhow,
I wanted to say one last. I just went through my mind that if people want to get a different perspective again on the COVID thing, Rania Khalek in Breakthrough News had a communist epidemiologist on talking about COVID, and that was great. It was a great show. That was a few days ago, and I recommend that one. I noticed that Rania is very into people getting vaccinated, and so is Aaron Mate, and yeah.
Yeah. Yes, there's a bit of a split in the camp there where Aaron Mate is and I don't, and who else is it? And Rania Khalek
being in Lebanon, talking to a communist epidemiologist.
Oh yes.
And he actually goes through, the reasons, capitalism helps spread these diseases.
Well, right, yes.
And it's really great. It's a great
I haven't
thing.
seen that, but yeah, that's a good one. It's nice that she got somebody into. See, that's the sort of, you should be interviewing those kind of people about fucking COVID, the COVID virus, because they're at least they're medical instead of interviewing adjunct professors of economics. I know I keep saying that, but I just found that the most ridiculous, fucking most ridiculous thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think we'll just run quickly through the last bit of it. Because I really want to hear him say that, Didi. I really want to hear him say that, because that bit really says everything. No, he didn't say the bit about the vaccine only doesn't really protect you from severe thing. Okay. He hasn't said that yet, has he?
I thought he did.
No. Did he say that, anybody? Did anybody hear him say that?
I'll put him on.
Hang on, wait.
Is known as... It was,
Hey, Noli D. Hi. Okay. Just
still
also
a professional athlete at age 47. One of the best conditioned boxers in recent history. The Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya, got a breakthrough days and said that he was fully vaccinated. And he tweeted from the hospital that COVID had kicked his ass. I don't know if he took any early treatments or what they gave him, but you didn't see the same kind of cheering and gloating over De La Hoya. In fact, if you read about him having to cancel his fight and possibly cancel his career, which was going to be this big nationally televised like pseudo fight, you have to read to like paragraph 18 in the article to even see that he's fully vaccinated, whereas the headlines about Rogan were all about him taking ivermectin and being this lunatic anti-vaxxer. And of course, the outcome isn't really that the recovery of Joe Rogan isn't.
Yeah,
really
right. They don't even talk about that. He's taking horse dewormer. It's like, well, he's not taking horse dewormer, but what happened when he took ivermectin?
I mean, this speaks to the whole denigration of science by the science, with a trademark on the end, because ivermectin is one of the most inspiring drugs in history. It received, or its pioneers, Dr. William C. Campbell and Dr. Satoshi Omura received a Nobel Prize in 2018 for pioneering this drug using microorganisms, just pure simplicity. They basically drew on natural organisms to make a drug that wiped out river blindness and elephantitis, two of the most debilitating diseases that were harming millions of people in the poorest regions who were the most vulnerable.
Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cantwell, who will present his Nobel lecture under the title Ivermectin, a reflection on simplicity.
What I'm about to show you is going to change your life forever. The demonstration that you're about to see was filmed live 2019 in the Sunshine Coast. I demonstrate a brand new revolutionary process that shows someone how to rewire their brain in just minutes. After a decade, I had been studying and I'd read all the books. I was double trained in NLP, success coaching, quantum.
Okay, I'm not sure what this is. This looks like some sort of ad, is it, or is? Oh, okay. Anyway, let's not worry about it. We're obviously not going to come across that bit where he says, that the vaccine doesn't stop severe disease. That's BS. What he said there. Anyway, the whole thing about the whole horseworming idea that the mainstream, the corporate media has put out is really not a great thing that they did there, because that's not
it's
of
bullshit.
Course that's BS. Of course ivermectin can come.
It is used for horses,
yes,
but that's not.
But that's not actually how it is. So that's very unfortunate, and he's using corporate media BS to sort of, I would invite people to look at Dr. John Campbell's YouTube channel. I've put a link in there, and it's actually a really good, I'll put another link in. It's actually, he's very measured. He sticks to science. He's looked at ivermectin. He's not funded by any big pharma. He's just trying to do his best, and I will put the link in there, and you can have a look at that. He's not a conspiratorial kind of person, so that's why I kind of value his. He does pretty much a video every day, and he's been doing that for the last year or more on COVID, and before that he was doing other issues. So anyway, you might find his thing about ivermectin is interesting. I don't know if he's done any recent things about that. But anyway, that's pretty much what you can see with Max Blumenthal is that he's against the vaccine, but he's for people getting monoclonal antibodies, and that he thinks everybody can spend $1,500 getting monoclonal antibodies after they get COVID, which that's his idea of fixing the problem. And he also conflates all those other measures as if anybody who is okay with the vaccine because they can see it stops severe disease and keeps you out of ICU, that you must be for all those other measures too, like vaccine mandates and vaccine passports and all of that kind of thing, which isn't true. So that's the unfortunate thing, is trying to dump anybody on the left that is okay with vaccines, that they must be okay with all these other things that are problematic.
All of the various abuses and what have you.
Which is BS, and it's not fair. That's not fair to say that. And it's also a privileged position to think that everybody can just race out and get $1,500 worth of monoclonal antibodies, which actually doesn't really give you protection in the end, as Dee Dee was pointing out. Dee Dee, it's just it doesn't give monoclonal antibodies, doesn't give any lasting protection, does it?
Very little.
Very little. Yeah. Anyway, so that's really, we started off talking about the militarized police and that's been in existence since 9/11. It's not something new that's happened with the COVID thing, which Caitlin Johnson kind of indicated in that, seemed to imply in her article. We went through that article, we sort of have explained all of that to the best that we can, even though I'm not very au fait with what's going on in Australia, because there's no reliable fourth estate here. So, that's a problem. Sorry, Dee Dee, did you want to say something?
Going back to monoclonal antibodies, I'll just say, because monoclonal antibodies are only used when somebody gets COVID, people are building antibodies from COVID, but monoclonal antibodies will weaken the immune response because you're basically using somebody else's immune response instead of generating your own.
Yeah. And so why
so
he's
you'll
okay...
have some immune response
but
because
why
you've had
he's
the
okay
disease.
with that big pharma product, but he's not okay
It's
with
stupid.
the other one is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And just shows that he's just doing anything, throwing out whatever sticks to the wall.
One of the
to
things
try and
about the ivermectin thing, I just wanted to throw a few things in there. I mean, it was invented by a Japanese scientist as an animal antiparasitic, and it was found to have a number of other applications, and it was found to be perfectly safe for humans as an antiparasitic. Now, a lot of drugs, they find that they have other applications that are okay. And there may be some benefit, but the thing is, while there may be some benefit, it's really up in the air whether there is or there isn't. But we know vaccines have a marked benefit, like really substantial benefit. They will keep you out of hospital or ICUs in almost all cases. So, vaccines are the ones to have. Vaccines are also free. Monoclonal ivermectin, if you can get it, is really expensive.
And I was just one more thing about ivermectin. As I said, Dr. John Campbell talks about that, but also, at one point in India, there was the studies that were happening in India. It looked like there was some promise, and I realized that it's an anti-parasitic, but they thought that it had some antiviral qualities, and so there was.
They actually found that those studies were flawed,
and they couldn't. Yes, all right, and that's really unfortunate. At the time, it looked like it was okay. But that's really unfortunate if those studies are flawed. But anyway, I just wanted to...
There may be some benefit. I'm not saying there's none.
Yeah, but I mean, ivermectin in human doses, it works really great with antiparasitic stuff, and it has very, very low, really, really low side effects. That's just all I wanted to say about that, and people can look that up and check out, and that's really bad if those studies were flawed, because that would have been a great thing. It would have been a great thing if it worked. But I just want to address Nolly D. I'm really, really, really sorry to hear that about your mother. I had no idea. Is this on the 11th of September?
What happened?
Your mother died.
Oh, no.
Of COVID, Dee Dee. So I'm really, really sorry to hear that, because Nolly D is actually, you live on a reservation, don't you, Nolly? I recall from, I've met Nolly on Fred Hampton Leftists, and I think that Nolly lives on a reservation. I'm not exactly sure where it is.
Has less than 3,000 people.
Yeah, where is that? If you don't mind me asking. Anyway, and I'm really, really sorry that happened. Was she able to get to a hospital?
Yeah. There's a delay, so she might take a minute to answer.
Right next to... Oh, you live right next to the hospital. Oh, okay. And Western Washington. Okay, then. Anyway, I'm really, really sorry. That's just awful. Really awful. They wouldn't take her. Oh, Jesus.
Oh,
why
no.
Why is that?
Oh, God.
Till she was too far. But didn't they even do any palliative, measures for her? They didn't just send her off gasping for air, did they? There were no beds. Jesus, didn't they?
It's triage.
Right. Didn't they give her any sort of intervention at all, or they just sent her off like gasping for air?
Yeah. That reminds me of your mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. They sent her with oxygen.
They sent her with oxygen.
Yeah.
Did that help at all? I can't imagine it made a whole lot of difference, because it just, it can only work for, to some, and then, you need some real serious intervention. Then, when they had to take her, she was comfort measures only.
Yeah.
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't.
Yeah. Well, that's just dreadful. So did you have to deal with your mother dying like that? That must have been absolutely horrific. We had to deal with my mother dying this year, but she was also gasping for breath, but that was because, not from COVID. And we got the nurse to give her a palliative sedation of 3 things, midazolam, morphine, and Maxilon, and she almost died immediately. It was really kind of merciful, because she was really in a bad way for about an hour. But I couldn't imagine having to deal with my mother just ongoing gasping for air. That would have been just awful, and I'm really, really sorry that happened.
Yeah.
That's really awful. Really, really awful. God, that's so awful.
Yeah.
It took your mother a week to die. Oh, Jesus. Were you able to get anybody to come to the home at all, to your home, and give her some heavy sedation or something, or some heavy painkiller? She was the last to speak fluent Salish. Oh, okay. Wow. Ay. Wow. I'm so sorry, Nolly.
Yeah, it's really terrible.
May your mum rest in peace. Rest in power. She's with the ancestors now, hey?
I'm part of the one.
Yeah, she's part of the one. Yep. Yeah. Your poor mommy.
That's very sad.
Yeah.
That's terrible. It's terrible when that sort of thing happens.
Yeah. Dawn, Beauty and the Diabetes is also indigenous, aren't you, Dawn? Got me choking them back at the moment. You have to excuse me. Of course, Nolly.
Yeah.
Much love to you. And I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And I'm so sorry that your mother had to go through that. Really, really awful. We'll have to talk about that again sometime. Oh. Yeah. I couldn't imagine, like, I remember when in India, there were so many people in India were going through that sort of thing where they would go to a hospital and they couldn't get in and they were dying in the streets outside of the hospital. I thought, oh my God, that is a fucking nightmare. You know? I couldn't even imagine that. Oh, we love you too. Okay, well, I hope that your day is a good one, Nolly. And we're so sorry that happened to you. That is just, I just can't even imagine that. That's just awful. And something that should never happen. So I hope your day is okay. We'll talk about this again. Yeah. Anyway, we might wind this up now. And thank you so much, everybody, for dropping by. And I'm so glad you dropped in, Nolly, because I've always enjoyed your seeing you on Fred Hampton Leftist, and I'm so glad that you dropped by. And it's always lovely to see everybody who often frequents these live streams, Dawn and Holly and Carl and who else is there? And Kim and Tom and Jeffrey and so many people who pop in, and I don't know, Michael. I haven't seen Michael before, and I wish that I didn't have altercations with people who are anti-vaxxers. Like I always enjoy Whipple Pump. I can't say that name. Whipple Poodle or something. I've always enjoyed their comments on other streams. So hopefully, hopefully one day hopefully one day we don't have to talk about this awful thing anymore and have all these stuff and everything. But anyway, anyhow, so we hope you all have a really good day today. I hope that some of this live stream has been sort of interesting, and the earlier parts with the militarized police discussion, hope that was kind of somewhat enlightening. As I say, I don't really know much about Australian politics because we don't have any reliable fourth estate here at all. We don't have any independent, really left journalists that do any sort of significant and digging into any of that. So I'm just, I just really don't know much about it, and I focus on U.S. imperialism for obvious reasons. But anyway, so thanks a lot. We'll call it a night here. So have a lovely day, and thanks Dawn for dropping by. Thanks Holly, as always. We love you all, and we'll talk to you soon. And much love to you and your families. Okay, bye, Nolly. Okay, bye.